Chapter 36. Astronomy was basically an interest class, and the class time was completely up to Professor Didi. Even though the class schedule was from 1930 to 2100 hours, it was actually adjusted. For example, today's astronomy class would start at 1800 hours in the evening. Since there was no class on Wednesday afternoon, most of the students weren't in a hurry. They only whispered to each other and guessed what Professor Didi would teach in astronomy. But as expected, there were too few topics in astronomy and life. It was even more illusory than magic. The students could only rely on their imagination, and they were inspired by legends and stories. White and Luo Boat didn't have so much spare time. The two of them suddenly became nervous. It wasn't that they wanted to prepare for the class. They didn't even have a textbook for astronomy. Moreover, after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, their debt would double, and that would be a total of 320 credits. They only had 120 credits, and the remaining 200 credits couldn't be earned from the next 3 classes. Website: https://vipcanshu. VIP. Therefore, they had completely given up on earning credits from the class. Luo Boat just wanted to lie down and wait for death. White, on the other hand, placed her hopes on the dueling class on Friday. The prize for the champion of the dueling class was a total of 1,000 credits. If they could get this prize before 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon, they would be able to clear their debt. Victor's original plan was to use his fantasy beast for duel practice from tonight onwards to increase his chances of winning. But now, not only was her time taken up, she also had less time to catch up on sleep. Wait, speaking of fantasy beasts. White couldn't help but look at Luo Boat and whisper, "Luo Boat, the introduction to magic is tomorrow morning. Where's your fantasy beast?" Luo Boat's expression gradually changed from nervousness to fear. Dake Dimming was in the library. Among the first years, there were 4 people who spent most of their free time in the library. One was Dake, one was Ai Ma, one was Sarah, and the last one was an unknown student from the House of Fools. Exactly one for each school. They were basically the top students of their respective academies and were at the pinnacle of intelligence. Dake wanted to look for some astronomy books to read after he received the notification that his astronomy class was about to start. Because astronomy was a hobby class, there was no final exam, so he was more casual when looking for books. Copy of Astronomical Symbols. A copy of Starry Sky Decryption. This piqued his interest. He took out the 2 books and moved them back to the desk in the reading room. It paid attention to Astronomical Symbols because it saw a circle of symbols on the cover of the book. One of them was that appeared on the coat of arms of pride. So that's how it is. This is the symbol of the sun. Dark drew an O on the paper and then added a. He seemed to be deep in thought. The symbol of pride is the sun. Doesn't seem so unacceptable. The sun is the central celestial body of the solar system. The 8 planets, asteroids, meteors, comets, outer Neptune celestial bodies, and interstellar dust in the solar system all revolve around the sun. And pride's sequence level is 1, which is the number that fits the central symbol. If I remember correctly, one of Ivan's evolved forms is to have the power of the sun. This is a reference point. How to connect the sun with pride. Maybe it will help me analyze the sin of pride. It was already 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Dake ate some dessert in the dessert room and drank a cup of unscented black tea before he packed up and left the library. Today he still drew pride for storage. His goal was to accumulate as many credits as possible before Friday afternoon. Then, he would replace it with a longer shelf life and return the thinking bottle to Professor Kazair. When he passed by Ai Ma, Dake happened to catch a glimpse of her studying the value of money. This made Dake a little shocked. He felt like this girl was going astray. Dake couldn't help but shake his head when he thought of the argument she had with White and Luo Boat about the credit debt. The astronomy classroom was in the spiral clock tower in the center of the Shangmalian castle. Climbing up the spiral staircase to the 12th floor, one could reach Professor Didi's astronomy classroom. If one didn't come early, it was easy to be late. Dake was glad that he had a good habit of coming to class early. This class was still held by the 4 schools. The students from the School of Magic were obviously more interested in astronomy. Before Dake arrived, there were already many people in the classroom whispering excitedly. Professor Didi was a very kind little fairy. As the dean of the House of Fools, she didn't get angry at all even when she deducted credits from the students. And as soon as class ended, she would be very easy to talk to. Even if the students were chattering in the classroom, she wouldn't mind. Yes, Professor Didi was already sitting on the podium. 6 o'clock sharp. The bell didn't ring. Instead, it was the loud bell that symbolized the alternation of day and night. Duong! The bell rang throughout the campus. The sun set and the moon rose. On the spiral staircase that gradually turned dark, White and Luo Boat jumped up like rabbits. The 2 set the alarm and got up at the right time. They stayed in bed for another 10 minutes and then hurried out of the dormitory. Course they didn't eat. And of course they didn't sleep well. The hundreds of millions of magic chess pieces before bed made them lose precious sleep. Running on an empty stomach and sprinting made them even more tired. It's over. The bell of despair hit their hearts. Bang! The 2 broke open the door and rushed into the classroom. 5 credits each, God Broheim. Professor Didi didn't even turn around to look at them. She just drew the moon on the blackboard. She was obviously going to talk about astronomy related to the moon in this class. White and Luo Boat sneaked into the classroom and sat down in the corner of the last row. As for the credits that were deducted, the 2 didn't care so much. Anyway, they couldn't get enough credits, right? Since it was the first astronomy class for first-year students, Professor Didi didn't talk about anything too profound. When she entered the second half of the class, she suddenly waved her hand and the ceiling of the classroom became transparent in an instant. It seemed to become a water mirror, shortening the distance between it and the night sky. The students had never observed the moon so closely. Above the rippling dark night sky, a full moon hung in the sky like a jade plate. The originally boring atmosphere disappeared. The classroom became lively in an instant. Professor Didi looked at the children pointing at the full moon with a gentle face. This time she didn't stop them. But 2 people looked at the full moon very close and couldn't suppress the surging emotions in their hearts. One was Dake. The other was White. Chapter 37. By the time the astronomy class ended, the night was already dark. Only a full moon hung high in the sky, its moonlight bright. Only then did the students realize that tonight was actually a full moon. Dake Dimming walked on a narrow path, far away from the crowd. He needed to find a secluded corner to calm down. The Shangmalian castle was well connected, and there were magic statues patrolling every night. He avoided the magic statues and found an open window nearby. He sat on the edge of the window and looked up to see the full moon in the night sky. Looking at the full moon from the top of the clock tower made his mood fluctuate uncontrollably, and his body became slightly hot. The reason for this was bliss. The bliss +1 slowly floated in his vision, making him realize that the moon was the symbol of bliss. Before this, he had never thought that the 7 sins could be so closely related to the stars. He remembered the URL, Vipkanshu. 6. The great sin known as the source of evil. The star known as the beginning of all gods. Why were they related? What was the essence of the great sin? Thinking was a kind of exercise. Once it started, it was hard to stop. Dake's eyes turned, and he suddenly noticed a shadow flashing by on the bridge below. It seemed that someone was like him, unable to endure the loneliness of the night. White Gouda confirmed that he had reached a crossroads in his life. He had transferred his credits to Luo Boat, and now he only had 30 credits left. Luo Boat, who had obtained 100 credits, could finally go to Professor Kazair to buy the materials for Fantasy Beast. He had heard that the materials for Fantasy Beast were quite expensive, and that the time that could be bought with 100 credits was only at the beginner stage. There was only one night left before the next magic class, and tonight was Luo Boat's last chance. This was a critical moment, and White should have been by Luo Boat's side, assisting him with his homework. But he took advantage of the time when Luo Boat went to find Professor Causayer to slip away. It was White's first night out alone. When there was no one around, the overly large castle would inevitably produce a sense of desolation and gloominess. White was quite brave, but she couldn't help but hug her arms and shiver. It wasn't until he came to an external bridge and focused his attention on the 2-finger-thick black book in his hand that the chill gradually eased. After confirming that the moonlight was able to shine directly on the ground. Under the moonlight, Victor opened the cover of the book. What he saw was a short sentence: frowny face walk into the abyss and stare into the abyss. When the moonlight shone on the characters, the originally flat characters suddenly trembled in White's vision and transformed into a language that he had never seen before but could understand. Clear the fog and see the truth. The full moon will guide you. It was on the second day of school when he entered the library for the first time, when he obtained this book, Into the Abyss. In order to complete his summoning assignment, he had to search for information about the Minotaur. He found this Walk into the Abyss that was hidden in a corner. After confirming through Luo Boat that only he could see the changes in the text. Should it be a pleasant surprise, or was it a sense of mission from the unseen world? White felt like he had been chosen. His last name was God, and his bloodline originated from the legendary hero. But in fact, other than being welcomed and celebrated by the students at the beginning, he didn't feel special as the hero's son. Until he found this book. Full moon. It was a word that was fascinating in and of itself. After more than a month of playing, he almost forgot about this book hidden in the drawer. Until tonight in astronomy class, when he saw the full moon at a very close distance. Only then did Werther remember the book. He couldn't hold back the excitement in his heart and finally came here with the book. When the moonlight shone on the paper for about 15 seconds, the changed text changed again. The pink mist rose and converged into the shape of a bird, giving it guidance on its path. White was ecstatic and immediately followed Pai's guidance. Upstairs, Dake, who was sitting by the window, happened to see everything. Naturally, he also saw the pink arrow that only certain people could see, and his eyes gradually became strange. Should we follow them? Or should I just leave it be? If this was yesterday, Dake would definitely pretend that he didn't see it. But tonight he couldn't calm down. He took out the school card, injected a trace of magic power, and summoned the little fiend magic beast. Go follow. Roger. The little fiend magic beast immediately spread its wings and flew down. Dake also jumped down and quickly walked downstairs to the bridge. With the school card in hand, he could clearly see where the little fiend magic beast was flying. After crossing the bridge, he was in no hurry. Just like that, he maintained a fixed distance and followed White without being able to see him at all. It was already 9:30 in the evening, and there was not a single person in the castle except for the stupid golems. They followed him like this for about 10 minutes. White was still walking forward, but Dake suddenly heard footsteps behind him. He thought of something and hurriedly hid behind the statue of an unknown Grand Magus, standing close to the statue. The Grand Magus' wide robe successfully covered his whole body. The slightly hurried footsteps hurriedly passed by. Only when the sound completely disappeared did Dake let out a light sigh and slowly walked out from behind the statue. At this time, the school card suddenly trembled. Not long after, the little fiend magic beast flew back. It lost him. He seemed to have noticed me and then suddenly sped up, disappearing after turning a corner. The little fiend magic beast explained in a long-winded manner, its face full of grievance. Dake nodded in amusement. He didn't see you, right? It wasn't unexpected that the little fiend magic beast would lose him. After all, he was the hero's son, so there would always be something special about him that no one knew. Perhaps he had the legendary sixth sense, or seventh sense. The question was, Did he see what the little fiend magic beast looked like? The little fiend magic beast desperately shook its head. Definitely, 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 he didn't see me. It's good that he didn't see me. Dake began to walk back. There was originally no need to follow him. He didn't take this matter to heart. There were many uncertainties in the Shangmalian world. The history of the castle was too old, and the secrets were too old. Too many people had already forgotten the history. When the hidden secrets came to the surface, the dust of history would eventually fade. And the truth always came with the fog. Who would uncover the fog? Who could grasp the truth? The hero was here. Chapter 38. White Gouda carefully pushed open the mural and came out of the wall. Just now, he vaguely sensed that someone was following him, but when he turned the corner, he saw a pink torch pointing directly at the wall. The word magic condensed on the torch. He reached out with his left hand and poured magic into the wall. The wall rippled like water. He gritted his teeth and entering an extremely secretive secret passage. On both sides of the passage, there were torches every few meters. When someone approached, the torches would burst into flames and illuminate the passage. The passage was winding and there were many forks. Sometimes it was like a snake, sometimes it was up and down. As his senses were gradually confused, White could no longer tell whether he was going down or going up. When he finally got out of the passage, he saw the same scenery in the castle. After a few more steps, he entered another secret passage. After repeating this several times, White was completely confused. Remember in 1 second. https://vipcanshu. VIP. As the fog on the page gradually dispersed, the words became blurred, and into the abyss returned to silence. White felt that he had been fooled. It took Victor half an hour to escape from the labyrinth of the castle and return to the common room of the Knights' Academy. Luo Boat was still rushing to make the fantasy beast. One of his peers happened to be interested and gave him a few pointers. Probably because he understood the difficulty and value of accumulating credits, Robert was very cautious. Every step he took was extremely slow, and the production process could be considered smooth. Now he had reached the most crucial step, which was also the most difficult step, the drawing of refining array number 1. White watched silently, not daring to disturb him. But when he was drawing the refining array that even Deanna could successfully draw, Luo Boat was extremely nervous. His fingers trembled and the tip of the pen slipped. He had made a mistake. Oh, don't be nervous, Luo Boat, we can continue. White rushed over and held his hand. Luo Boat was sweating profusely, but with the help of White, he managed to put away the pen and continued to draw lines. Even though the extra stroke was very eye-catching, he still managed to complete the entire refining formation number 1. The refinement array lit up smoothly. Luo Boat was so nervous that his whole body was trembling. It took him several tries before he was able to successfully pick up the fantasy beast's hair and put it into the light. As the hair was gradually engulfed by the golden light of refining formation number 1, the light became even brighter. Golden threads separated from the number 1 refining formation and wrapped around the magic card in layers. Finally, a golden cocoon was formed. White said, "There's one more step. Luo Boat, input your magic power and think about the things you like." Luo Boat placed his hand on the golden cocoon and slowly injected magic power into it. "Something I like. Magic chess." The magic card broke out of the cocoon. Luo Boat excitedly picked up the magic card that the two brothers had worked on for 3 days. The blurry and transparent outline on the card began to change as soon as it met his eyes. It was neither Jack Russell, Ron's guardian angel in Harry Potter, nor was it Ron's pet, Spotty, a little mouse. It was the eternally motionless castle in the magic chess. Card name, Fantasy Beast. Type, Elf card. Level, Race, Elemental. Attribute, Ground. Magic power, 300. Attack, 0. Defense, 300. Ultimate skill, solid defense. When Luo Boat summoned his fantasy beast, Castle, everyone was stunned. The castle of the magic chess was equivalent to the player's life. It occupied a fixed 3x3 chess space and had 10 times the health bar of a single chess piece. It could consume one turn to activate the inherent skill, solid defense, which reduced the damage to the castle in the next turn by half. Once the castle was captured, the player would be declared defeated. Luo Boat's fantasy beast, Castle, was also a 3x3x3x3M huge cube. When it was summoned, it gave people a sense of immovable solidity. Luo Boat, you're good. White punched Luo Boat's shoulder in surprise. Luo Boat was so excited that his neck turned red. He said excitedly, "Come here, my castle, let me have a good look at you." The castle didn't move at all. After several attempts, Luo Boat's face turned pale. Someone suddenly said, "What's so surprising, Luo Boat? The castle of the magic chess can't move. Isn't that common sense?" Ha 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 ha. "I'm sorry, I can't help it, ha ha ha." That night, Luo Boat dreamed that he had transformed into a majestic castle, but a group of rats with front teeth gnawed at the corners. He gradually lost hope and finally collapsed. White also had a dream. He dreamed of the librarian in the library. That senior from the senior year. He dreamed of taking a walk with her at the back of the open school. Everything seemed to have returned to normal on Thursday. White and Luo Boat returned to their usual selves. Their enthusiasm for studying was gone, but they were a bit more disciplined than before. After class they would avoid AI Ma. AI Ma didn't even think about paying attention to them. Dake earned credits as usual for his weekend shopping at Traveler Street. By the way, he got an extra 200 credits for being a substitute teacher. Dake always felt that his vertical calculation method bonus points were too little and argued for it. Professor Li gave him another 150 credits, so it was really easy to earn credits. After the history of magic class in the afternoon, Dake went to the library as usual. People grow up. He was already able to walk past Panduola without changing his expression. But after he walked far away, he suddenly turned around and saw Werther talking to Chen Yushan shyly. This made him realize something, and he couldn't help but smile as if nothing had happened. New homework was assigned for the arithmetic class. Every time this happened, Anna and Luo Si would pester him. Dake looked at the two little girls sitting across from him and felt a little helpless. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Anna finally finished her homework and leaned back in her chair with a wow sound. The little white rabbit hidden in her thin school uniform was eager to jump out. After completing her homework, Anna became restless. She quietly took out a card with a black rose drawn with ink and moved close to Dake. "Hey Dake, do you want to try this divination card? I heard it's very accurate." Dake looked up and said casually, "Love divination. So you know about it." Anna was like a kitten who was caught stealing dried fish. She moved the love divination card back little by little. "It's not like I don't really know what's going on outside." Dark found it a little funny. He asked again, "Where did you get this card?" Anna thought for a while. "One of them was a gift when I bought candy. This one was stuck in the crack of the door when I went out this morning." Dake frowned. "Someone is spreading this kind of card? Can you lend me this card?" Anna immediately said happily, "Of course." Her finger was cut. Blood. Chapter 39. With the card in hand, Dake took a closer look at it. For this thing to be so popular, it naturally couldn't be a shoddy product. The card itself was similar to the material of the magic card, and the flowers depicted on it were vivid and lifelike, giving people the feeling that they would bloom at any time. Anna's card was a cherry blossom design, and Dake's card was a black rose. In addition, Professor Li's card was a blue rose. Dake also saw that AI Ma's card was a lily. Cherry blossoms symbolized love and hope, representing elegant, simple, and pure love. The black rose symbolized desperate love, full of hatred and curses, wanting to take the one you love as your own. The blue rose represented pure love, sincere and kind prayers, the arrival of miracles, and the occurrence of the impossible. As for the lily, it represented 100 years of love, containing the deep blessings for family and love. This kind of card used a variety of different colors, not only giving each card a different meaning, but also adding additional elements to collect. The first website was https://vipkanshu. Vip. In addition to the exquisite appearance, the card's function was also very outstanding. By injecting magic, the flower could come to life, and even emit a burst of floral fragrance. In particular, you could see the divination of the one you love, and even the one you love, the one you love. This was really attractive to the Shangmalian students in their adolescence. Dake pondered for a moment, injected a trace of magic, and gently flicked the card. The black rose on the card suddenly flew out, and the petals scattered with the wind. He stretched out his hand to catch a black rose, but he only felt a faint chill. Then, the black rose dissipated as if it had dissolved. He was deep in thought, and suddenly he looked up. He didn't know when Diana had leaned over, but they were eye to eye and nose to nose. A trace of milk fragrance went into his nose. Yes, this child secretly ate milk candy in the library. Dake, who had exposed Diana's crime, immediately pressed her forehead and pushed her away. Diana stepped back unhappily, but her eyes were still fixed on the love divination card in Dake's hand. Dake did not mind. He also wanted to find out who his true love was. But on the surface of the card was a picture of Ivan. O equals omega. Smiley face Emma? Diana widened her eyes in surprise. Dake, on the other hand, shook his head and smiled. Looks like this love divination card isn't that reliable. However, when he was injecting his magic power, he noticed something strange. Can you give it to me? Dake looked up and asked. Diana quickly nodded. Dake, you really like your fantasy beast. Dake nodded. After all, this is my first magic elven card. But from the looks of it, the so-called divination of this flower tablet is not a real lover. Probably used some small tricks. Is that so? Diana tilted her head and became happy again. On the other side of the reading room, White was doing his homework while biting the end of his pen, frowning. Luo Boat was even more unbearable than him. The consequences of not paying attention in class were gradually fermenting. As the difficulty of his homework increased day by day, there was finally a problem that he could not solve no matter how hard he thought. His head hurt. White put down his pen and pulled out a flower tablet from the gap of his textbook. This flower tablet was a gift for the two of them when they bought the magic chess. The flower tablet was decorated with red lilacs. It was the feeling of first love. Quietly injecting his magic power, a fair and beautiful face appeared on the surface of the card. A teenager's love life was ignorant. At the very beginning, he cared about it because it was similar to his mother's profile. Later, it gradually developed into longing. He broke away from the mold and became independent. He cared about it just because it was her. Especially when he saw her again today. He became even more restless. Luo Boat glanced over and muttered, "Do something if you like it so much." White blushed and was about to say that he would be satisfied as long as he could look at it a few more times. But the beautiful face on the card suddenly stuck out her tender tongue and licked the corner of her mouth. Werther let out a cry of surprise. In a library that needed to be quiet, his scream immediately attracted a lot of attention. Luo Boat asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" "No, it's nothing." Werther blushed and sat down, his hands clenching the flower cards. "Let's end the homework here. Let's go practice dueling. Tomorrow is our last hope." Luo Boat had been waiting for this moment. He quickly closed his books and homework and stuffed them into his backpack. The two of them quickly left the library. When they registered their departure time at the counter, White's heart almost jumped out of his chest. That night, Dake ended his time in the library early. He was quite concerned about the trace of abnormality when he injected his magic power into the flower tablet. But it was not easy to experiment in the library. He could only go back to his dorm. When he walked out of the library, the sky was already dark. He looked up at the night sky and found that the moon was still very round. When he reached his dorm, he locked the door, put down his backpack, and took out the black rose flower tablet again. Something's wrong. Putting the flower tablet on the table, Dake frowned and thought for a long time. Then he took out a magic pen from his drawer. Using a magic pen as a medium to transmit magic power could be relatively effective in avoiding some dangers and making it easier to observe. Dake took a step back, extended his hand, touched the magic pen to the flower tablet, and then injected magic power. It was not the tiny bit he had done in the library, but a continuous stream. Soon, the black rose on the card retreated to the edge under the influence of magic power, and the words "Love of your heart" appeared on the card. This time, the one who appeared was still Ivan. But Dake only had to think, and that Ivan disappeared. The one who appeared on the card was the Valkyrie Yvette, who was far away in the Duke's territory. Yvette was unexpectedly a golden-haired beauty with a gentle appearance. If it were not for the statues all over the kingdom, the people would probably think that she was the apple of some noble family's eye. Dake had another thought, and Yvette's figure gradually disappeared. This time Diana appeared on the card. Then Luosi, Panduola, Professor Li. Faces flashed on the card, and more magic power was injected into the flower tablet. Suddenly, the black rose on the card was peeled, and starting from the stamen, it disintegrated into slender black lines. Those black lines turned into thorny vines, entangling like small snakes. Dark abruptly raised the magic pen, and the thorny black vines suddenly broke through the flat surface. Snake heads grew out from the tips, and swarmed out to bite Dark. Small darts. 3 shark-headed syringes suddenly flew out, and in an instant, they exploded through the snake heads, nailing the restless flower tablet to the table. Nirvana -1. Sigma. Sigma *, take my recommendation. Chapter 40. The Blissful One. Floating in his vision made Dake realize that his feeling was not wrong. This flower card could indeed absorb people's thoughts through the transmission of magic. The so-called divination was just the person you are thinking of, extracted from the surface of your thoughts. By giving the flower card the concept of love divination, it led people to naturally think of the person they were thinking of when they used it, and then that person would be shown on the card. Even the following phrase, "the person you love, was only what you thought of it. It was just a small trick like that. Because it was not harmful, it would not arouse people's vigilance. On the surface, it was just a very interesting little toy. But now it seemed that it was not as simple as it looked. Dake used the magic pen to test again and confirmed that the flower card of the black rose was indeed damaged. He took out his notebook and began to record. He remembered the website, Vipkanshu. 6.1. The flower card could absorb people's thoughts through the transmission of magic. 2. There must be people who accidentally injected too much magic, but so far there was no feedback, indicating that the flower card only had a special reaction to the magic of a few people. I am the only one here for now. 3. The flower card could absorb great sins, indicating that its origin sequence was extremely high. 4. The person who could make this flower card must have a high level of skill. 5.1. No matter who made this flower card for whatever purpose. In fact, its ability to absorb blissful would not change. If he could collect enough flower cards, he could boldly try to raise blissful to more than 100 to make the blissful series of magic cards. His heart became restless. His greed was a little out of control. Dake calmed his mind, cleaned up the remains of the flower card, and put it in a sealed bag. At the same time, White and Luo Boat were practicing in the corridor of the castle. White's magic beast was a stag with the light attribute. When it raised its head, It was a full 2 meters tall with majestic antlers that were forked like branches. It had a much higher attack power than ordinary magic beasts. However, as an illusory beast, its magic power was still only 100. Card name, Magic Beast. Type, Sprite card. Level, Race, Bird Beast. Attribute, Light magic power, 100 attack, 200 defense, 100 ultimate skill, Light of the Soul. Dake's illusory beast, V, had undergone a qualitative change in its core. White's magical beast, Stag, and Luo Boat's magical beast, Castle, were completely reflected on the surface. Their illusory beasts were different from the standard template. White wasn't blindly arrogant when he tried to win the class competition. But after practicing with Luo Boat for a while, White gradually realized that he was too naive. Luo Boat's castle was too hard. Even with the stag's 200 points of attack, he was unable to deal any damage to it. After repeated attempts to no avail, White said helplessly, "This is not fair, Luo Boat." Luo Boat, on the other hand, swept away the gloom from last night and laughed in high spirits. "No, this is reality, White. 300 greater than 200, even I can calculate it." White frowned. "But I remember Professor Cheong-si once said that the surface data of a magic sprite card can only be used as a reference. In reality, there will be a lot of discrepancies." Luo Boat said proudly, "The discrepancies are that I'm harder than you think." I can't play anymore." White lamented. "Let's call it a night. I want to practice by myself." Then the two parted ways. Luo Boat strolled around outside and saw many first-year students practicing duels. But they were all small fights, so he smiled reservedly. After parting ways with Luo Boat, White took out the card decorated with red lilacs. He injected magic power, and that person's face appeared on the card again. White's expression was a bit absent-minded. The changes in the library made him realize that this card was unusual, but he didn't know how to deal with it. Should he tell the professor? Or should he explore it himself? If he told the professor, would his secret be exposed? He didn't come up with a solution. White took out into the abyss that he always carried with him. The moon was still very round tonight. Would it work? But as soon as he opened the book, and even before he walked out of the castle to bathe in the moonlight, the line of words began to twist, and a pink mist rose from the pages. But it didn't converge into the shape of a roue. Instead, it floated towards the lilac card in his hand. Startled, White subconsciously separated the two cards. However, the pink mist sped up and instantly drilled into the flower tile. Then the card immediately changed, and the lilacs on the card bloomed, releasing a strong floral fragrance. The figure of Panduola suddenly came to life. The senior who drilled half her body out of the card raised her soft and slender hands and combed her hair back, revealing her snow-white and delicate neck. White opened his eyes wide and looked at the Panduola, who was exactly the same as the real person. He was completely stunned. A few minutes later, White put into the abyss back into his bag, and only the card with the pink mist was left in his hand. He held the card in his palm, and from time to time lowered his head to look at the Panduola in the card and whispered, "Is it this way?" Panduola chuckled and nodded slightly. Her laughter was gentle and soft, like a clear spring flowing into his heart. White followed its guidance with a bit of infatuation. Soon he arrived at the place where he had walked last night. He hurriedly walked past the statue of the Grand Magus, and then turned into another fork in the road. Panduola's guidance was even clearer than the mist. He entered the secret passage and quickened his pace. This time he didn't take a fork in the road, and after 10 minutes, he arrived at a hall. This hall was hidden in the depths of the castle, and was about the size of a lecture hall. There were 2 stone pillars in the center, and the pillars were carved with images of dancing goddesses. At the very front, there was a tall altar. On top of the altar stood a statue of a goddess. As White walked in, the torches on both sides of the hall lit up automatically, illuminating every corner of the hall. White looked nervously at the statue. The statue was carved out of fine white jade, and the dust of history didn't leave many traces on it. It clasped its hands in front of its chest, closed its eyes and nodded slightly as if it was praying. The light of the fire shone on its body, but the reflection was as white as the bright moon. White suddenly realized that just looking at it made him feel like his mind was being sucked away. It was so sacred and beautiful. Paw footsteps suddenly sounded. Chapter 41. Who is it? White was very sharp. He almost instinctively went around the altar and hid behind the goddess statue. Then the footsteps became more frequent. There was more than one person here. White suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of loss. So I'm not the only one here. That feeling was like a toy that had been licked by others after much difficulty. Moreover, it was licked by several people at the same time. He didn't dare to act rashly. He could only listen to the sounds and imagine what they were doing. There were at least 5 or 6 people in the temple. Their voices were very low, and he couldn't hear what they were saying. But in the end, they seemed to place something in front of the goddess statue and chanted an incantation that sounded like a chant. The atmosphere gradually became tense. Thankfully, Victor's willpower was strong enough. If it had been Robert, he would have screamed and screamed in fright. Remember this in 1 second. https://vipkanchu. VIP. As the incantation reached a certain stage, the white light on the goddess statue seemed to flow, and the light became brighter and brighter. White tried to look up and found that some of the minor flaws on the statue were being carefully repaired. Are they just a group of tinkerers here to repair the goddess statue? This thought flashed through White's mind. He couldn't believe it himself. When the incantation ended, the atmosphere eased a little, and the group of tinkerers also spoke more freely. White could faintly hear what they were saying. Burn them to death. For the goddess. We will succeed. This is the holy war. Sizzle. The bright moon disappeared, and the day was coming. The light of dawn shone on the earth, as if the path of righteousness was eternal. Dake opened the door and walked out of the bedroom. Something slid down the door and attracted his attention. He looked down and couldn't help but smile. But after last night's experience, he quickly pursed his lips and repeatedly chanted Chu Shi Biao a few times before bending down to pick up the flower tile on the ground. The pure white devil's snare is a soft flower of love. Those who see this flower will be cleansed of evil. Dake inserted a bit of magic into the flower tile. Little Ibu appeared on the tile and gave him the best morning greeting. Today was still a refreshing day. Before classes on magical beasts started, there was only one duel class on Friday. Even so, the duel class was held on Friday morning so that the duel class could be delayed as much as they wanted. Today's class was held by all 4 schools. The class was held at Battle Hall 2. It wasn't even 8 o'clock, and almost all of the first-year students were eager to try. They were looking forward to the first duel in their lives. Even if this so-called elite mode was just a watered-down version of the real duel, no one would care about this. As long as they could go on stage, as long as they could shout, "My turn," the first-year students would be happy for a long time. Of course, there were also unhappy people. After all, not everyone could complete the illusory beast within a week. In yesterday's class, many people had their marks deducted because they couldn't make a magical beast. If it wasn't for White's generous help, Luo Boat would have been one of them. Since it wasn't time for class yet, Dake found a bench to rest on. Not long after, Deanna squeezed in with Luo C. "Dake, who do you think will win today's duel?" Deanna asked cheerfully. Dake smiled. "It's just a competition in class." Diana stretched out her hand and slapped her thigh, causing her whole body to bounce. "Anyway, my big white bear is already thirsty." Luo C quickly pulled Deanna's sleeve and whispered, "Control yourself. Didn't you say last night that you wanted to act more like a girl?" Deanna. Comma. Ding ding ding. The bell rang, signaling the start of class. The students stopped chatting and consciously lined up in the middle of the stadium. Professor Cheong-si was half a minute late. He walked into the stadium with a bunch of stuff. The weather is good today. Let's run a lap to warm up. Professor Cheong-si was as valiant as ever. He didn't hold back when he gave out tasks. The students, who were full of anticipation, were all stunned. I thought we didn't have to run today. Although the students complained, they were forced to run under the pressure of the professor. Luo Boat knew that extra points wouldn't help, so he didn't use any more strength. He controlled his speed and ran side by side with White. In the end, he couldn't help but ask, "Oh yeah, White, where did you go last night? I wanted to play around with you at 9 o'clock. White opened her mouth and said after a while, "Luo Boat, I don't have as much stamina as you. Can we talk after we finish running?" Luo Boat, "Okay." After 2 laps, apart from a few students, the first-year students of the 4 schools were all listless. Luo Boat wanted to continue asking, but Professor Cheong-si said loudly, "Those who still have energy over there, come and help." Luo Boat had no choice but to walk over with a few of the stronger students to help Professor Cheong-si set up the venue. Took about 10 minutes for the venue to be set up. The students had regained their energy and gathered in the center of the stadium. After a while, Professor Cheong-si took out a metal ball that looked like a bowling ball with 3 holes. He walked over with one hand holding it. He looked at the students of the 4 schools and asked casually, "Does anyone know what I'm holding in my hand?" The junior magisters looked at each other. More than half of them immediately raised their hands. This time, even White and Luo Boat raised their hands. Professor Cheong-si randomly picked a student. That student said excitedly, "It's a magic conducting ball, Professor." Professor Cheong-si said with satisfaction, "That's right, it's a magic conducting ball. It's the core of a magic conducting duel." She then inserted her thumb, index finger, and middle finger into the 3 holes of the magic conducting ball and continued, "The so-called magic conducting ball is also called a duel ball or a life ball. As long as magic power is poured into it like this, it can create a 360 degrees life boundary without any blind spots. Swati, tell us about the different levels of life boundaries." "Yes, Professor." Saraswati immediately stepped forward. Her weak-colored skin was still outstanding today. The life boundaries of a magic conducting ball are generally divided into 5 levels. The strength of each level is different. A level 1 life boundary has 1,000 points of magic power, a level 2 life boundary has 2,000 points of magic power, a level 3 life boundary has 4,000 points of magic power, a level 4 life boundary has 8,000 points of magic power, and a level 5 life boundary has 16,000 points of magic power. In a magic conducting duel, only when the opponent's life boundary is completely destroyed, or when the opponent voluntarily surrenders and uses up all of their magic conducting cards can they be considered victorious. 5 points, Swati. Professor Cheong-si poured magic power into the magic conducting ball. A spherical barrier made of many hexahedrons spread out. She gently pushed forward, and the all-metal magic conducting ball slowly floated forward. The magic conducting ball circled above the students' heads and then returned to Professor Cheong-si's hand. She said, "In a formal duel, controlling the magic conducting ball to avoid the opponent's attack is a must-learn skill. Of course, we don't have that many requirements for today's duel, and we're only using the retired practice magic conducting ball. The life boundary's magic power is temporarily set at 500 points. Omega. Chapter 42. After that, he talked about some rules that they had to pay attention to during the duel. Professor Cheong-si took out a jar full of number plates and asked the students to pick them one by one. The little mages stepped out one after another and reached into the jar to pick the number plates. Surprisingly, out of the 4 classes, there were only 78 students who managed to complete the production of the Fantasy Beast within a week. On average, there were less than 20 students in each class. Most of the remaining students were still in the process of failing and had to start saving credits to buy material packs. It felt like the professors had set up a trap and opened up Traveler Street before teaching the students how to make the Phantom Beast. This was to teach the first-year students who didn't know how to control themselves and how to spend credits. Anyway, it wasn't clear if the others had learned their lesson, but White and Luoboat had learned their lesson. As for whether they would change after learning their lesson, that was another matter. Dake walked to the jar and picked up a number plate. The website was https://vipkanchu. Good Lord, I'm destined to be? Deanna leaned over. Hey, what's your number? Dake. Number 7, and you? Deanna. 77, hee hee. Luo C. 55. Inject your magic power into the number plate and take it apart. Give me the blue side. Professor Cheong Si took out an empty jar again and took back the blue number plate. Dake finally noticed that the number plate in his hand was red and blue. After injecting some magic power into it, the red and blue cards would lose their magnetic force and could be taken apart easily. After handing in the blue number plate according to Professor Cheong Si's instructions, Dake held the red number plate and waited quietly. The center of the arena was divided into 4 equal sections by props. Professor Cheong Si placed 2 magic balls in each section. The students who didn't have the Phantom Beast were responsible for injecting magic power into the magic balls and learning how to open the life enchantment. Professor Cheong Si chose another 4 people to be the judges. The competition uses a single elimination system. The winner advances, and the loser exits. There is only one champion in the world of magic duels. Professor Cheong Si casually grabbed 2 blue number plates from the jar and placed them on one side. Then, he grabbed another 2 blue number plates and placed them on the other side. He repeated this process 4 times until there were 4 sets of number plates. She flipped open the number plate and read, "In the first round, 78 will advance to 39. 4 groups will proceed simultaneously. Number 6 and number 8, number 3 and number 28, number 66 and number 7, number 49 and number 5, get ready." Opening celebration. Dake glanced at the red number 7 in his hand and didn't seem to care. However, Deanna and Luo Si seemed to be more nervous than him. Dake, do your best. I'll always be on your side. Good luck. It wasn't like they were going to participate in variety shows. Dake walked to court 3 with a dark face. A total of 8 people went down the stage at the same time. Some were nervous and some were calm. Dake glanced at contestant 66. She was a girl from the School of Magic. She had 2 ponytails, big eyes, and a pale face. He comforted her casually. Don't be nervous. It's just a drill. Okay. The girl clenched her teeth and clenched her fingers. The 2 of them went to the contestants' seats on both sides of the stage. In the official competition, there was a platform for the contestants to look down from above. However, here, there were only simple contestants' seats drawn with white lines. Dake stood in the contestant's seat and looked at the stage. The rules of the competition in class this time were simple replicas of the rules of the real competition. 1/6 of the stage near the contestants' seats was divided into the summoning area. This meant that the summoning area was limited. You couldn't summon a magic fairy directly to the opponent's face. It was said that there was no such rule in the first magician duels. Therefore, the magicians often used tactical summoning to make the competition violent and chaotic. Some magicians even used line-of-sight interference to summon a large magic fairy directly to the opponent's face to block the opponent's vision. Later, the rules were gradually perfected, and this kind of farce decreased a lot. However, there was no limit to human imagination. There were still countless tricks under the rules. The referee for Court 3 was Rentgen from the House of Nobles. Rentgen waved at Dake, looking very dispirited. There was no other way. Being a referee was equivalent to a public execution. It was their fault for not being able to create a fantasy beast in a week. Of course, Dake remembered this classmate who went shopping early on Saturday morning. It seemed that he had spent all his credits in Traveler Street. In the end, he didn't have enough credits to buy more materials for experiments. And his fellow sufferer, Civet, seemed to be next door. Dake smiled subtly. In the official duel, the deck of cards was placed on the card table in the contestant's seat. The projection mechanism would enlarge the cards for the audience to see. At the same time, there were rules such as shuffling cards on the spot, starting with 5 cards, 1 round in 30 seconds, 2 cards in 1 round, and so on. The duel was divided into 3 stages. 1. Preparation stage. Shuffling cards, communication, taunting, starting. 2. Battle stage. Drawing cards, summoning, fighting, beating. 3. End stage. Communication, taunting, receiving cards, declaration. Of course, there weren't that many rules for today's duel. The twin-tailed girl from the Mage Academy was already holding the only Fantasy Beast card in her hand. She looked nervous as she waited for the referee's whistle. Dake was suddenly worried that she would break the Fantasy Beast. Both sides' magic balls had already been activated with 500 mana points. They were now floating in front of each other. Using mana to control the magic balls was an advanced technique. It wasn't within the scope of the first year's lessons. Therefore, if they wanted to move the magic balls, they could only move them physically. Rentgen. Beep, begin preparation. Dake took out Fantasy Beast, Ibu, from his card pack and held it between his index and middle fingers. He entered the preparation stage. Rentgen. Countdown to battle, 30 seconds. Rentgen. 3, 2, 1, begin. The moment the battle began. My turn. Summoning. Dake raised his magic card in an instant. In the 8th second of the battle, he successfully summoned his Fantasy Beast. Ibu lightly landed on the ground without any hesitation. It began to run like the wind. In the 12th second of the battle, it had already run across the battlefield, which was only 10 meters away. It used its paws to press down on the magic balls floating on the ground. Omega. Ibu tilted its head and looked at the girl opposite it. It had a cute expression on its face. Then it slapped the magic balls 4 times in a row. The magic balls' life barrier were completely wiped out. The twin-tailed girl was bleeding from the cuteness. Her mana was cut off, and she hurriedly summoned a second time. Ibuzachan gently waited for her to summon her Fantasy Beast, and then gave the magic conducting ball the final blow. Battle over. Winner Dake Dimming. Dake sighed, put away the cards and turned around. Boring. Boring. Does it? Chapter 43. That's it. Deanna looked at Dake as he slowly walked back. She couldn't help but blink. She felt that something was wrong. The 4 matches were going on at the same time. The others had just started fighting and you're already back. Degree. Diana had something that she hadn't said. She didn't think Dake would win. After all, Evie didn't look like the type of magic fairy that could fight or defend. How could it be as fierce as her big white bear? But could a duel be played like this? There wasn't even a clash between magic fairies. Just by relying on a faster summoning speed, Dake was able to step on the opponent's lifeline before he could summon his magic fairy. In the end, he went easy on them. It was probably because of Dark's charity. After all, this was his first duel in his life. If he couldn't even summon his magic fairy, it would definitely be a shadow for the rest of his life. Remember the URL. VIP can't you? 6. Of course, Deanna wasn't the only one paying attention to this match. Whether it was AI Ma or White, they all turned their attention to Dake when he left the stage. But no one expected that the duel would end in such a way. AI Ma carefully measured her summoning speed. Her face turned pale. Dake was really too fast. A mere 8 seconds of summoning time had completely surpassed the level of a first-year student. She originally thought that her 12 seconds was fast enough, but now it seemed that it wasn't. This wasn't something that could be reversed by the difference in strength between magic fairies. This was a crushing defeat in terms of magic fairy level. On the other side, White's face didn't look too good either. He was determined to win the class competition this time. But if he couldn't even summon his magic fairy, how could he win? What's the casting time of my summoning again? White suddenly realized that he hadn't calculated the casting time at all. Next group, numbers 1 and 13. Professor Cheong-si directly took out the number plate for the 5th group. Luo Boat said in surprise, "It's your turn, White." White nodded and walked to court 3 with the number plate in her hand. Her steps were heavy. His opponent was a boy from the House of Fools that he didn't know. The other party looked simple and honest. However, when both parties entered the arena, the boy from the House of Fools suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Are you really the hero's son?" White was startled. She didn't understand why he would ask such a question. During the duel phase, the two of them activated their summoning techniques at almost the same time. White had summoned the stag at least 2 seconds too early, but when the stag landed, accelerated, and rushed into the opponent's summoning area, the person's summoning spell was finally completed. A black bull with a layer of rocky skin on its head suddenly appeared in front of the magic ball, blocking White's stag. However, the stag continued to charge without hesitation. With the addition of strength from the acceleration, it forcefully flipped the black bull over. White held the advantage and did not waver. In the end, she exhausted the thick-skinned water buffalo to death. Immediately after, Anna, Luo Si, Ai Ma, and Luo Boat also entered the arena one after another. Anna won without any suspense. Her magical fantasy beast, Polar Bear, smashed her opponent's magical fantasy beast, Unicorn Rabbit, with one slap. Luo Si, on the other hand, was playing the role of a little white rabbit in the other match. On the other hand, Ai Ma's otter barely won. Ai Ma originally wanted to rely on the 12-second summoning speed to try to copy Dake's trick. However, her opponent was a top student from the School of Magic. Although he was a little slower than her, he still successfully completed the summoning in less than 14 seconds. The two magic fairies collided in the left half of the arena. Ai Ma's otter was a standard magical fantasy beast, with 100 magic attack and defense. It was at a disadvantage in a pure fight. In the end, it found an opportunity to spray a mouthful of salty soda on the opponent's magic fairy's face and turned the tables. As for Luo Boat, he was lucky to meet a student from the School of Fools. Both of them spent more than 16 seconds to summon their magic fairies. Luo Boat directly summoned Magical Fantasy Beast Castle on top of the magic fairy's ball. The hollow castle pieces perfectly covered the small magic fairy's ball, turning it into an unshakable fortress. This match dragged on until the end of the first round. While the students were dumbfounded, Professor Cheong-si helplessly announced that both sides advanced to the next round at the same time. In the first round, a total of 40 students advanced from 78 to 39. The second round immediately began. Dake was still in the starting lineup. His opponent was a student from the School of Aristocrats. That student was originally bragging to his friends. His magical fantasy beast was a small dragon dinosaur. In the last duel, it showed an overwhelming strength advantage. Looking at the whole arena, only Anna's polar bear could compete with him. Therefore, he was indeed qualified to brag. However, life was like this. Sometimes it was not because you were strong enough that you could cut through all obstacles, because there were many people stronger than you. Doran entered the arena with an ashen face. When he was close to Dake, he suddenly had an idea and asked shamelessly, "Dimming, can you let me summon my magical fantasy beast before we fight?" Dake's face was indifferent. "What do you think?" Doran could only laugh twice and walk down the path that was doomed to failure. F***CK. 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 Doran, who was quickly defeated, immediately ran into the bathroom and hammered the sink. "Damn it, it's just a bit faster. Why are you so arrogant? You must have learned summoning before entering the school. Or else with that little fox. F***CK. Don't let me catch up with you." After scolding and crying, he went out as a proud and elegant aristocrat. Doran walked out of the bathroom with slightly red eyes and just happened to see the only opponent in his mind, Deanna and Luo Boat of the School of Knights dueling. In the kingdom, the Doran family and the Greybale family were competitors on the surface, but the relationship between the two families was actually not that bad. He and Deanna had met a long time ago during a family visit. But the heartless Deanna did not remember him at all. This made him feel lost for a long time. And Luo Boat, who was opposite him as the follower of the son of Braveheart, was just a disgusting small character in his eyes. But Luo Boat's magical fantasy beast, Castle, was really eye-catching and made people vigilant. Doran, you're back. Yes, I went to the toilet. Doran showed a flawless smile and asked his companions, how is it? Our kingdom's bear should not disappoint, right? A little fatty with his arms crossed in front of his chest raised his chin and said proudly, see for yourself. Doran turned his head and looked over. Roar. Deanna's polar bear roared fiercely and inserted its fingers into the gap between the castle and the ground, lifting the heavy castle up by force. Chapter 44. Dolan, W. Ha 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 ha. Deanna watched her white bear lift Luo Boat's tortoise shell little by little. She couldn't help but laugh with her hands on her hips. Luo Boat, on the other hand, looked like he had seen a ghost. He opened his mouth so wide that you could stuff a goose egg in it. Don't just stand there, Luo Boat. White, who was watching the battle, couldn't help but shout. But Luo Boat didn't know what else he could do, other than forcefully closing his mouth. The students of the Knight Academy who had laughed at Luo Boat the night before, but who had been slapped in the face in the first round, actually laughed without any malice. After all, it was really funny. His castle was about to be overturned by the big white bear. Remember. https://vipkanchu. Luo Boat finally couldn't help but shout, defend! The castle finally responded to his call for the first time. A layer of yellow light flowed over the walls. It was obvious that the castle had become harder after using the Fortify skill, and the earthy yellow barrier could help it absorb the impact better. However, defend was still defend, not take root. What should be overturned will be overturned. Ow! The polar bear broke out with the power of a bear and completely overturned Luo Boat's castle in one breath. After that, the magic ball was no longer protected. As Deanna commanded the polar bear to completely destroy the magic ball's life barrier, this unequal duel was officially over. Luo Boat's face was ugly as he left the field. He finished the handover with White. Brother, I'm counting on you now. White. Don't worry, I'll succeed. Luo Boat. This is our last chance. White. There's no what if. Deanna shook the card and recalled the polar bear. She happily skipped away. When she saw Luo C and Dake, she trotted over and patted her chest proudly. What do you think? Is my bear big? Dake gave a rare thumbs up. Big. Numbers 13 and 16. Professor Cheong Si announced the number of the next group. White and Luo Boat quivered and turned their heads at the same time, looking in the same direction. Ai Motis was watching the match alone. She suddenly noticed that someone was looking at her, so she couldn't help but turn her head to look at them. Coincidentally, her eyes met with two people's. Hey, carrot. They separated upon contact. Ai Ma turned around, looking a little unhappy. White and Luo Boat looked at each other and stood up at the same time. Luo Boat couldn't help but say, "Don't lose." White's eyes were slightly dignified. "I won't, as long as I'm not slower than her." After trying it out in the previous round, Victor had already figured out his summoning speed. Although he didn't practice for a long time, his usual summoning time had been compressed to 12 seconds, which was almost the same as Ai Ma's. He even thought that as long as he concentrated a little more, he could further compress this time by 1 second. If it was 11 seconds, he would have a chance even if he dueled with Dake. The temporary field was only 10 meters. Although 10 meters seemed short, it could be crossed in a few steps. However, it would take some time to summon a magic guide fairy to land. Not to mention that it took time to accelerate. As long as he could successfully summon the magical fairy before the life enchantment was completely destroyed, the little fox with low attack and defense shouldn't be a match for Stag. Coincidentally, White and Doran had the same thought. Of course, now wasn't the time to think about this. White was very clear that his current opponent was AI Ma. There won't be a problem. AI Ma's otter is very weak. The only thing you need to be careful of is that it can spray water. White and AI Ma walked past each other, but neither of them spoke. The new mages were still too naive and couldn't grasp the trash-talking part at all. The field was divided into red and blue sides. White stood on the red side, and AI Ma stood on the blue side. The referee was Civet from the House of Nobles. Civet looked at the two key students of the Night Academy meeting in the second round and seemed to be gloating. However, he still had to blow the whistle. Beep, ready. White and AI Ma immediately held the magic fantasy card in their hands. Outside the field, Dake, Deanna, and Luo C walked over together. He was also very concerned about this match. Deanna whispered, "Dake, who do you think will win?" Dake squinted slightly. On the surface, White has the upper hand, but in reality. Deanna. In reality. Dake. They are not simple. Deanna. Battle begins. 11.5 seconds later. White broke through the limit and completed the summoning spell before AI Ma. The majestic stag appeared in the white light, its huge antlers like tree branches fiercely facing the front. Start running. In less than half a second, AI Ma also completed the summoning spell before 12 seconds were up. The otter that was similar in size to little Ibu slid when it was about to hit the ground, avoiding the stag's charging path and nimbly choosing to run in a circle. AI Ma's thinking was very clear. In terms of strength, her otter was definitely no match for White's stag. But the ultimate goal of the duel was not to defeat the opponent's magic elf, but to break the magic sphere's life enchantment. Even though she failed to imitate Dake in the last match, AI Ma still learned from it and opened up her thinking. At this time, most of the first-year students were still immersed in the duel between magic elves and didn't understand the essence of a magic duel. Seeing AI Ma's otter pouncing on his magic sphere like the wind, White's heart tightened slightly, and he hurriedly called the stag back to defend. This move made him lose his first chance to win. The stag's attack was obviously stronger than the otter's, plus it started first and the straight line distance was shorter, so he would definitely win. But he didn't have this thought yet. The stag that returned to defend couldn't catch up with the nimble otter, causing the magic sphere's life enchantment to be bitten by the otter and lose a whole chunk of its magic. But the otter didn't dare to continue, and immediately threw away the magic sphere and ran away. After the stag returned to defend, it protected the magic sphere, its 4 hooves tapping slightly hurriedly. White was also slightly nervous. He thought that AI Ma would be very difficult to deal with, but he didn't expect it to be this difficult. No, this stalemate isn't a solution. I have to think of an idea. White's mind turned, and he immediately had an idea. Under his command, the stag lowered its head and pushed the magic sphere up, then stuck it between the 2 antlers. Perfect! White's heart calmed down. AI Ma's otter didn't dare to confront the stag head-on, which made White feel that victory was in his hands. He immediately directed the stag to rush toward AI Ma's magic sphere. This was using what he had learned on the spot. But when the stag started running, AI Ma suddenly directed the otter to approach. The otter seized the opportunity, opened its mouth and sprayed out a water gun, hitting the magic sphere stuck between the antlers. That magic sphere flew up in an instant. At the same time, its magic power also dropped a lot. A sure kill skill. White wasn't shocked but happy. The sure kill skill of a 1-star magic elf card was usually a skill that consumed 50 magic power. For a magic elf with only 100 magic power, it could only release 1 shot. In other words, the otter was no longer a threat now. He immediately directed the stag to catch the magic sphere again. But just as the stag caught the magic sphere, the otter, who shouldn't have been able to release a sure kill skill with magic power, actually shot out a water gun again. This water gun was obviously trained, and the shooting was extremely accurate. The red magic sphere was hit away again. The 500 magic power had dropped to 200 points. White stared at Ai Ma's otter. The otter, who should have dissipated on the spot because of the 100 magic power, was still standing there full of energy. What the hell is going on? Turning his gaze, White finally discovered that Ai Ma still had a card in her hand. A group of LSPs, the senior sister is far ahead equals looking for a recommendation. Panduola looking for a recommendation. Chapter 45. The second magic card. In the eyes of the little mages, this was simply cheating. Why did Ai Ma have 2 magic cards when they only had 1? Professor, she's cheating. Luo Boat roared in his heart. How can Ai Ma do this? Doesn't she know that this is our last hope? Well, she's so smart she must have known. That's why she specially got the second magic card, just to stop us from paying the debt. While Luo Boat was inexplicably angry, White in the field was also somewhat affected. But he was still calm. The magic ball's defense was 0 by default, so once it was hit, the magic of the enchantment of life would directly decrease. Ai Ma had already hit the magic ball 3 times, but the enchantment of life still had 200 points of magic left. It should be able to withstand the next attack. Website: https://vipkanchu. Let's decide the winner before the second attack comes. White muttered in a low voice, suddenly raised magic beast, stag, and shouted, "Shine, light of the soul!" In an instant, the stag on the field suddenly raised its head, releasing an unusually strong light from between its 2 horns. Ultimate skill: Light of the Soul. Magic cost: 50. Cooldown 60s. The ultimate skill of a 1-star magic fairy usually had a cooldown of 30 seconds. More than 30 SCD usually meant high power. The Light of the Soul illuminated half of the field, and the otter had nowhere to hide. White couldn't help but smile proudly. Ai Ma, on the other hand, suddenly raised the card in her hand. Ding dong. There was a slight sound like gold coins hitting each other. A phi symbol appeared in the otter's eyes at the same time. It was the symbol that represented the kingdom's holy coins. Gold coins x3. The magic card in Ai Ma's hand was such a simple card. Every gold coin could be used to recharge the magic guide fairy. Each recharge was 50 points of magic, which could shorten the cooldown of 1 ultimate skill. Could be recharged a total of 3 times. This meant that her otter could still release 2 ultimate skills, just enough to finish off the magic ball with 200 points of magic left. The premise was that it could survive. Seeing that the otter couldn't withstand the Light of the Soul, Ai Ma had no choice but to recharge it twice in a row, allowing the otter to barely survive with 50 points of magic left. At the same time, White's stag only had 50 points of magic left. After 3 to 5 minutes of summoning, the magic fairy would begin to consume its own magic. Once it consumed 1 point, the 2 magic fairies could no longer release their skills. Werther's eyes were sharp and full of fighting spirit. "Charge and kill it, stag!" Ai Ma screamed. "Avoid it! Go around the field!" The small field, which was only 10 meters long, was actually not enough to support the stag's speed. The relatively agile otter had the advantage in its evasive maneuvers. Emma nervously observed the cards in Victor's hand and reached for her card bag again. On the other side, Victor had also noticed Emma's actions and could not help but want to curse. "There's more! Damn it, I can't hide it anymore. I wanted to save it to deal with the dimming." Victor gritted his teeth and pulled out his second card from his card pack. Yes, he also had a second magic card. Luo Boat saw that White also had a second card and immediately said excitedly, "What did I say? White never disappoints." Famous double criteria. Deanna couldn't help but ask. Dake, why do they have so many cards? Dake stared at White's second magic card and raised his eyebrows. He sensed a familiar aura. Seeing that the battle was intensifying, the students outside the field gradually became more and more excited. Especially the players from the Knight Academy. They were all cheering with pride. Although most people didn't have a good impression of the two players on the field. One was the son of a hero, but he was at the bottom of the pack. The other was a top student who thought he was smart and isolated himself from the crowd. But this didn't stop them from being students of the Knight Academy. On the field, White and AI Ma raised their magic cards almost at the same time. Forbidden Love. Golden Treasure Box. The magic card in White's hand released a pink mist, faintly forming the outline of a woman. The magic card in AI Ma's hand released a dazzling golden light, dazzling everyone's eyes. On the field, the pink light and the golden light competed for brilliance. The stag and the otter stared at each other. The otter's eyes actually turned into the shape of Heartsuit. The stag's eyes turned into the shape of Phi. Both of them didn't expect that the opponent's magic card would have the same nature as theirs. The otter was attracted by Forbidden Love and was controlled by White in a single round. The stag was attracted by the Golden Treasure Box and was controlled by AI Ma in a single round. Both of their magic elves exchanged control in an instant. It's over. The moment he saw the situation clearly, White's heart fell to the bottom. On the other hand, AI Ma was ecstatic and said with unprecedented excitement, "Stag, attack the red magic ball." The magic ball that was sent flying by the otter was still floating in the air. The stag suddenly sprinted. Before the otter could move, it charged with its giant horn and smashed the life enchantment on the magic ball. Bang! The enchantment turned into specks of starlight and dissipated. We won, we won. AI Ma jumped up suddenly. At this moment, she finally had the emotions that a child her age should have. Her chubby little face was flushed red. She was extremely excited. White was at a loss. We lost just like that. This is impossible. How could we lose to AI Ma? Where's Dimming? The magic card that fell from his hand shook out lilacs. The pink mist retracted into the card and gradually turned back into a blurry human figure. This was originally the flower card of the Love Divination card. Now, the Forbidden Love magic card could not successfully reverse his defeat. This was the victory of hard work. It was the defeat of laziness. How could this be? Luo Boat shouted in despair outside the field. Before White went on the field, he said that as long as he was not slower than her, he would win. It's over, it's completely over. After 1 point, it's a debt of 1,280 credits. I'll never be able to repay it. In Luo Boat's mind, the scene of AI Ma holding the IOU, stepping on their backs, and using a witch's sharp voice to scold them to mop the floor like slaves emerged. Sigma. Sigma. Too tragic. Dake was already lost in thought. Gold coins charging Golden Treasure Box. Is this the value of currency? Then what about Forbidden Love? That should be the flower card, right? How in the world did Victor make the flower card into a magic card? If I follow him, will I be able to find the source of the flower card? The defeat of the hero's son did not affect the continuation of the competition. When White came out of the field, he was not greeted by Luo Boat, who was in despair, but by a few boys from the Knights Academy. Well done, White, you're really something. One of the boys with a sunny face patted him on the shoulder and encouraged him. Another boy also nudged his arm and comforted him. Don't be discouraged, your opponent is AI Ma after all. White's expression stiffened. He was not in a good mood. Yes, those with votes please vote. Those without votes are here to support me. Thank you, brothers. Chapter 46. The disappointed White and the despairing Luo Boat turned into petrified statues in the wind. But the atmosphere of the competition was heated up because of White and AI Ma. The third round of 20 to 10. Originally there were 4 groups, but now there were only 2 groups. When Dake went on stage again, a group of girls quickly gathered outside the arena. These girls were mainly from the aristocratic academy, but there were also students from the other 3 academies. Especially the girls from the Magic Academy. They had no resistance to those students who were good at studying, self-disciplined and handsome, as if they had walked out of a book. Of course, they were still in the age where they would be shy if their fingertips touched. They were simply attracted to them. In the arena, Dake looked at the students from the Night Academy. This time he didn't give them any chance. Remember the URL? VIP can't you? 6. Even though there was no entertainment value, such a clean victory still had its own unique flavor. The 4th round of 10 to 5. There were still no exceptions. The 3rd round of 5 to 3. The 5 contestants were Dake and Deanna from the Aristocratic Academy, AI Ma from the Night Academy, Saraswati from the Magic Academy, and another male student from the Magic Academy. Dake was lucky enough to have a bye. The 2 students from the Magic Academy fought against Deanna and AI Ma respectively. In the end, the 2 students from the Magic Academy couldn't cross the high wall. Saraswati from the Sorcerer's Institute displayed great strength, but she was still no match for Emma and was defeated. The other male student was defeated by Deanna's violence. The 4th round of 3 to 2. This time, the goddess of luck favored Deanna. Therefore, the semi-finals were between Dake and AI Ma. Although this was only the semi-finals, in the eyes of the students from the Aristocratic Academy and the Night Academy, it was the finals. The finals that would decide the champion between the Aristocratic Academy and the Night Academy. This strong confrontation attracted everyone's attention. Even White and Luo Boat, who were almost weathered, came back to life. No matter how much they complained about AI Ma, they still stood on the side of the Night Academy. Under the gaze of all the students from the 4 schools, Professor Cheong-si personally stepped onto the stage as the referee. Dake and AI Ma entered the arena separately and stood in their respective positions. The duelists could draw their cards during the preparation stage. Dark and Emma both took out the only fantasy beast in their hands. Dake's face was expressionless. AI Ma was obviously a little nervous. Dake dimming. AI Ma suddenly plucked up her courage and said. Although Dake was puzzled, he still looked at him. However, AI Ma gritted her teeth and finally said, "I won't lose to you." Dake's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to say, "Have we ever interacted before?" But in the end, he didn't say such embarrassing words. Dake, "I've seen your efforts." AI Ma, "If you have something to say it after the match. Keep your mind and focus on the match." Professor Cheong-si suddenly interrupted the exchange between the 2 and began the countdown. These 2 had given her a big surprise in this in-class competition. She really wanted to know who would be the winner in the end. Would it be Dake, who had relied on his excellent summoning skills to advance without any suspense? Or would it be AI Ma, who had relied on 2 extra magic cards to get to where she was now? Perhaps it was the joy of a teacher to be able to see her students grow beyond her expectations. She lightly raised her hand, and a 3-second countdown appeared in the center of the arena. Begin. He was fully focused on racing. Without any hesitation, Dark summoned his illusory beast first. But it was different from the previous times. Ivan didn't immediately run to the other side. Instead, he jogged to the center of the arena. AI Ma summoned her fantasy beast, Otter, at the 11.5-second mark. Ivan stood up and extended his claws at the otter. The otter, with an intelligence level of 2.0, reacted after a while. It rushed at Ivan and made a series of ing-ing-ing sounds. Ing-ee. Ivan stretched out his claws again and waved his hand. The otter carefully came to the center of the arena. 2 magic elves with a magic attack and defense of 100, and their sizes were almost the same. They began a close confrontation in the center of the arena. Ing! The otter opened its mouth and made a deterrent sound. Ing-ee! Ivan tilted his head and used act cute. Otter immediately grinned and began to chuckle. So Ivan walked past it calmly and ran briskly to AI Ma's magic ball. AI Ma was subconsciously stunned. Then she noticed that Dake had used a new magic card. What kind of magic card is this? Looking at the otter sauce that could only laugh foolishly and had completely lost its ability to fight, AI Ma's little brain almost stopped working. Of course, she couldn't just sit and wait. She immediately took out her strongest card, Golden Treasure Box. Now that Gold Coins X3 had lost its effect, only this golden treasure chest could bring her a little bit of warmth. However, her summoning skill had a cooldown of 15 seconds. Unlike Dake, whose cooldown had been reduced to 8 seconds, she still needed to wait for a while before she could use a new magic card. When her summoning skill's cooldown was over, Ivan had already pressed his paw on the magic ball, just like before. Path. Claw. The magic ball's magic value -100. Path. Another claw. The magic ball's magic value -100. Otter sauce, cheer up. AI Ma finally couldn't help but shout. The otter seemed to have heard her voice. It suddenly broke free from the psychedelic effect of the happy card. The moment it turned around, it spat out a water gun. But Ivan grabbed the magic ball and blocked it. Bang! The magic ball's magic value -100. But the magic ball was also hit by the water gun's impact. Good chance. AI Ma immediately seized the opportunity and used her summoning skill to activate the golden treasure box. 11.5 seconds later, a treasure box full of gold appeared on the field. But Ivan on the field had unknowingly puffed out his chest, his eyes full of arrogance. When the golden treasure box appeared in front of him, he just smiled contemptuously and walked past it with elegant steps. Then he slapped the magic ball. Path! The magic ball's magic value -100. When the otter rushed back, he had already raised his paw again. Path! There was still no head-on confrontation. There was no killing between the magic elves. There was only a crisp paw-paw sound that hit the ears. Dake didn't even use Pride 2 to end the match. He put Ivan back into the card, put it in the card bag together with Happy Card and Pride Eye, and turned to leave the field. As if this semi-final match was no different from the warm-up of the first match. In fact, it was the same. The level of the first-year students was too low. When AI Ma used 2 magic cards, he had already used 3. This made this duel seem meaningless. Because the whole process was too strange, the audience outside the field didn't even react. There was only sparse applause when he left the field. Then the applause became louder and louder. It shook the stadium. The finals that followed were even more meaningless. Deanna's summoning speed was already considered fast, but she couldn't squeeze into 13 seconds. She couldn't even summon the polar bear that she was most proud of and was killed in the competition. In the end, even Professor Cheong-si couldn't help but facepalm. This was the first time in her teaching history that such a competition had happened. The difference was too great. It was the first time that the book was updated. Please vote. Chapter 47. At the end of the duel class. After Professor Cheong-si gave out 1,000 credits as the champion's prize, he invited Dake to the stage. Dake, who had not yet fully grown, stood beside Professor Cheong-si. His head only reached the bottom of Cheong-si's sphere. Professor Cheong-si, who had 1/16 of the giant bloodline, was too big. Dake tried his best to maintain a slight smile on his face as he calmly faced the chattering students below the stage. Professor Cheong-si said, "Dimming, you don't mind teaching the students some learning secrets, right?" Dake said cheerfully, "Of course I don't mind." Professor Cheong-si said with satisfaction, "Then I'll leave the rest to you." Dake nodded, took a step to the center and said, "Actually, there are no shortcuts to learning. Other than self-discipline, there is also temperance. Those who can restrain themselves have the most prestige. But if you restrain yourself too much, sometimes it will have the opposite effect. Therefore, moderation is also very important. Whether it's moderation of desire or learning, It's necessary. I personally prefer to strike a balance between work and rest. I use some interesting content to relieve the boredom of learning and give the brain some time to rest. Moreover, everyone is the architect of their own fate. Dake spoke for about a quarter of an hour. Some people understood the logic behind it, while others just wanted it to end quickly so they could eat. This was like the road of life, where there was a sign at a fork in the road. The left was rugged but led to the peak, while the right was smooth but led to the valley. Most people would still choose to walk on the right. The so-called reason was precisely because one knew it but did not practice it. That was why it was only reason. Dake could only speak truthfully about his feelings over the past month. He left the stage amidst the applause, which was somewhat fake. Then, it was Friday afternoon. Travelers Street was open again. Dake took out his school card to check. Credits. 1570. Compared to the first opening of Traveler Street, the first-year students this week were a lot more reserved. In short, it was definitely not because he did not have enough credits. Fortunately, some ordinary consumer goods were actually not that expensive. 1 academic credit was enough to order a cup of coffee and sit comfortably in the Forest Coffee Shop on Traveler Street for an entire day. Before heading to Traveler Street, Dake once again took out the notebook used to record items. Compared to last week's list of items, there were a few more items this week. These items were containers that could be used to store mental matter for a long time. Magic Brain Bottle, one of the alchemy tools of the Magic Brain series. It stores emotions, desires, knowledge, and other substances in a simulated magic brain. The advantage is that it is active and can be stored for a long time. The disadvantage is that it is active and may cause the stored items to be contaminated and deteriorated. Insect tree. A type of potted plant with branches that resemble insects. It can inject emotions, desires, knowledge, and other substances into the insect branches. Since the insect branches are essentially plants, there is no need to worry about the stored substances being contaminated. The downside is that the insect tree dies, making it difficult to cultivate. Advanced Thinking Bottle. The advanced version of the thinking bottle. Other than being very expensive, there's no harm in it. The shelf life can be extended to a month. But in fact, these things were very expensive. It was just that the advanced thinking bottle was more expensive. Dake's first goal today was to choose one to purchase. The peak period of people squeezing into Traveler Street was from 12 to 12:30. Dake purposely waited until 12:30 to walk out of the Noble House's Tower Road. On the way to the castle gate, he unexpectedly met White, Luo Boat, and AI Ma. It was them on Monday as well. Dake recalled what happened on Monday and kept an eye out. AI Ma Métis combed her fluffy brown hair and fixed it with a cute cat hair clip. She even put some powder on her face to make her skin look fairer. She had never dressed up to this extent before. The impression she gave off had changed a lot. Could it be that the defeat in the duel was too much of a blow to her? Dake couldn't help but wonder. On the other side, White and Luo Boat were still the same as before. After losing their last chance, they finally decided to apologize for their previous quarrel and beg for AI Ma's forgiveness. "I've already apologized, AI Ma." Luo Boat once again blocked AI Ma. AI Ma puffed up her cheeks and was a little angry. "So I said I heard it. Can you move aside?" White hurriedly pulled Luo Boat's arm. She didn't know how the apology had developed to this point. Luo Boat's thinking was probably still at the level of a child. He thought that everything would be over as long as he apologized. But White had experienced a lot. She knew that apologies wouldn't solve the problem most of the time. They were actually here to beg AI Ma to give up on collecting the debt. That was a total of 640 credits. And in half an hour it would double to 1280 credits. If it were them, they definitely wouldn't give up on the debt so easily. White couldn't help but blush when she remembered her previous bold words about paying off the debt. She had no choice but to say, "AI Ma, we already know that we were wrong. We shouldn't have forced you to lend us money to buy the magic chess, and we shouldn't have insulted you after that." "AI Ma, you've already said this before. I also accepted your apology, so can you get out of here immediately?
Well,
Werther mustered up his courage as the son of a hero and said shamelessly, "So, can we clear the debt? For example, change the contract and fix the debt at 640 credits." Luo Boat interrupted. 640 is already a lot. White was dumbfounded. She wanted to immediately seal his stinky mouth. Aima sneered and looked at Luo Boat. This time she finally said straightforwardly, "You don't owe me 640 credits. 5 credits, White. Give me back 5 credits, and we're even." White's ears trembled. He thought he heard wrong. "What do you mean? How can it be 5 credits?" Aima said, "Look at the school rules, White. Credits are a special currency used within the Shangmalian. It's impossible for the school to not have regulations on loans. Loans that exceed 10 times the principal amount are invalid in the school. Starting from 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, the contract is invalid. You just need to pay me back the principal." White's whole body was about to split. "But you said before," Aima angrily said, "because Luo Boat insulted me. I'm not happy to tell you. What's wrong?" "White, Luo Boat." Aima suddenly pulled out her school card. 5 credits, White, hurry up. There's a Shangmalian women's tea party at the Forest Coffee Shop this afternoon. If you're late because of you. White hurriedly swiped the card and paid off the debt. The burden that had been on his shoulders for a whole week suddenly disappeared. White's whole body was floating. He always felt like his feet were off the ground and he could fly. But after Aima took back her school card, she didn't give him any face. "Also, White, I think it's necessary to remind you to stop hanging out with Luo Boat. Think of your parents who passed away." Chapter 48. Aima left the last ripple and left without looking back. But the atmosphere between White and Luo Boat froze in an instant. Only Dake, who was a heartless eating machine, finished the entire melon. Combined with what he saw on Monday, as well as the two's many abnormalities, Dake more or less guessed the development of the situation. But what he couldn't understand was how the trio had ended up in such a state of disintegration. Just because he didn't put pressure on them. Couldn't be that bad, right? However, it had to be said that Dark was interested in the follow-up development. Aima, White, and Luo Boat completely broke up. The relationship between White and Luo Boat was also severed because of Aima's last ripple. Website. https://vipkanshu. Next. Would White turn to Aima to repair the old relationship? Or would she have a stronger relationship with Luo Boat? Wow, I feel like I'm watching a drama. It wasn't too late to go to Traveler Street later, so Dake continued to eat. In any case, White did listen to Aima's last words. The key was that Luo Boat's crazy behavior this week made him realize that Aima's warning was not without reason. Yes, White gradually realized the root of the problem. This was the main reason why the atmosphere gradually became stiff. Before the air completely froze, Luo Boat finally couldn't help but say, "No way. Wait, you didn't really listen to Aima's words and want to." White laughed and patted Luo Boat's shoulder. "What are you talking about? Luo Boat, we've been friends since school started. How about it? Since this damn debt doesn't exist, should we go to Traveler Street or go back and play a game?" Don't scare me." Luo Boat sighed in relief. "Of course we should go back to the library." Werther froze on the spot and said in astonishment, "No way. The library." Luo Boat also laughed and said, "I haven't finished my math and magic history homework, right?" Aima probably didn't expect that her last words to White would have a greater impact on Luo Boat than on White. Amidst the stagnant atmosphere, Robert finally realized that if he didn't make any changes, he might lose this hero's son as a friend. Seeing that the two of them were really heading towards the library, Dark's gaze gradually turned strange. He could not help but walk out from the corner. Did he choose the path of a gay friend? How long can she last? Once there was a crack in the relationship, it wasn't easy to repair it. Dake suddenly felt that this melon was tasteless again. He shook his head and walked in the direction where AI Ma disappeared. Speaking of which, why would AI Ma want to participate in the women's tea party? Why did she change? AI Ma Métis, of course, wanted to try the so-called work and rest after hearing Dake's speech. That was to use some interesting content to relieve the boredom of studying and give the brain some time to rest so that the brain could work more efficiently. She learned about the women's tea party at Traveller Street when she passed by Forest Coffee Shop last week. A maid gave her a flyer. She threw the flyer away at the time, but her memory was good enough. Forest Coffee Shop was a coffee shop with a real forest theme. As long as the customers stepped into the shop, they would enter the range of the forest venue card. In the quiet environment of the giant trees, enjoying the aftertaste of the mellow coffee was a special feeling. This time, the women's tea party was held by the senior students in the name of a reading club. It was mainly for the exchange of reading between the young ladies of the literature department. AI Ma felt that this kind of entertainment might be suitable for her. So in order to become better, she stepped out of the cage of seeking knowledge that imprisoned her. A person's personality wasn't innate. Even if a character had an early personality in a work, it would change with the development of the work. Could be a fall or growth. It depended on the character. Dake had a deep understanding of this. He followed AI Ma into the pavilion in the middle of the lake. He chose one of the two empty stone tables and sat down on one of the stone blocks. He slightly twisted his butt and luckily transferred. He walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake again and crossed the garden bridge known as the Replacement Bridge to enter Traveller Street. After not seeing each other for a week, Traveller Street became a bit unfamiliar. Dake wasn't in a hurry to go to Morgan's store. Instead, he strolled around a shop that sold flowers and potted plants. It was forbidden to keep animals in the castle of St. Marian Academy, but no one forbade them from growing flowers and plants. Even Professor Thompson of Potionology would occasionally mention some interesting potted plants in his class and recommend that the students try to grow them. For example, the cat grass in front of Dake. As soon as he entered the shop, Dake's attention was attracted by the cat grass placed in the most conspicuous place. He almost forgot the purpose of his visit, the worm tree. The so-called cat grass was a type of plant that, except for its tail and roots, was completely a cat's plant. Every spring and autumn, beautiful flowers would grow on top of the catgrass's head. The academy prohibited the raising of cats, but allowed the raising of catgrass. This was a difficult mystery to solve. Although the roots of the catgrass had to be planted in the soil if they wanted to, they could drag the flower pot around. And if they left the soil for a short period of time, they wouldn't immediately wither. More importantly, they could also meow, and had most of the cat's habits other than excretion and eating. In other words, raising catgrass didn't even require cleaning its feces and cat food. Instead, it was replaced by a potion called cat juice. Every day, the catgrass would be watered with cat juice and brought out to bask in the sun. It would be enough to raise it. According to Dake's knowledge, after Traveller Street was opened last week, many girls' dorms had an additional pot of catgrass. For example, Luo C bought an orange pot of Garfield. Cats are really good companions for healing the body and mind. Dake couldn't help but express his thoughts as he scratched the chin of a short-eared cat. Do you think so too? Suddenly, a familiar aura came from behind. Dake suddenly trembled like a kitten that had met a lion. His toes tensed up. Orchid fragrance gently stroked the back of his neck. Even without turning around, Dake could feel the heavy pressure. Dake maintained his posture of playing with the cat and asked curiously, "Senior, why are you here too?" Panduola chuckled and said, "I followed you here." Dake, "Oh, you bought cat juice?" Panduola, "You're so hard to fool. Please recommend me Heartsuit." Chapter 49. Dake and Panduola didn't interact much. Most of the time they only exchanged a few words during the registration process. But in order to prevent bliss plus one, Dake would always run away after registering. It was just that he had been in and out of the library too many times, so they were familiar with each other. Even though this wasn't what he wanted to see. He slowly moved away from Panduola's pressure and stood up calmly, smoothing out the creases on his clothes. Dake turned around and said, "Hello, Senior." Panduola blinked, the heart-shaped dragon scales under her eyes reflecting a magnificent color. She crossed her arms and said with her head held high, "Are you here to buy cat grass?" Dake didn't want to buy it at first, but on second thought, raising a pot of cat grass in the dormitory didn't seem like a bad idea. Raising a cat was indeed a good way to mediate the mind. Remember the URL, Vipkanshu. 6. It was good for soothing emotions and reducing stress. Especially cats that didn't need to be cleaned. If used properly, it might be even better than those legendary magic tools in reducing fury. I'll just buy a pot. But before that, he needed to buy a pot of wormwood. Dake wouldn't mess up the order. If he bought the cat grass and didn't have enough credits to buy the wormwood, wouldn't that be putting the cart before the horse? So he thought for a while and said, "I do have this idea, but not now." Panduola said enthusiastically, "Is there something you're worried about? If you don't have enough credits, I can provide an interest-free loan. You can pay it back in a month. How about it? What are you trying to do with this skillful method of yours?" Dake's face darkened and he hurriedly said, "I have other things to do, so I won't disturb Senior." As he spoke, he had already taken half a step forward. However, Senior Sister Pandora had finally found this coincidental opportunity, so how could she let him go so easily? When Dake wanted to take the other half of his foot, Panduola had already blocked his way, squinting her eyes and smiling. "Do you have an appointment with someone? Don't tell me it's that little girl who always sits behind you." She was talking about AI Ma. Dake didn't take this opportunity to run away, but said seriously, "Senior, I'm still young." Panduola was stunned and asked curiously, "Duola, don't like to be called young?" Dark said with a straight face, "This is an objective fact." Panduola smiled. "Then I can only look forward to when you're older." Looking at her moist pink lips opening and closing, Dark felt that he was about to lose control of his primal strength. He hurriedly said, "Let's talk later." Then, he forcefully crossed the line and hurriedly ran away. "We'll talk about it when the time comes." That's not cute. After leaving the cat flower and wood shop, Dark turned around and entered the goo bird flower and wood shop that was not far away. After putting it in a black bag, Dake poked his head out and glanced at the cat flower and wood shop. After confirming that Panduola had left, he went in. He had really decided to buy catnip grass. "I have 740 credits left, more than I thought." Dake estimated that he could still buy a lot of things, so he strolled around the cat flower and wood shop. There were a lot of cat grass in the shop and there were all kinds of varieties. Moreover, the cat grass looked very obedient. Every one of them was irresistible. But as he strolled around, Dake suddenly realized that something was wrong. Because in front of him there was a snake. It was a cobra with its tail buried in a flower pot. When Dake saw it, it opened its eyes very sharply, and swayed its slender snake body in front of Dake's eyes. He was shocked on the spot. "Don't be afraid." The clerk of the cat flower and wood shop was a young lady in her early 20s. Her hair was tied up behind her head with a hairband, and she wore an apron and gloves. She looked very plain. Perhaps she saw that Dake had been strolling around for a long time, so she walked over and patiently explained, "This is a new species of cat grass, snake grass. Don't worry about it biting, it's essentially a plant." Of course, Dake wasn't afraid. He was just a little surprised. "Since there's snake grass, don't tell me." "Of course." The clerk lifted her curly hair that drooped down to her eyelids and chuckled. "The batch that just came in has a lot of animal-type catgrass. Do you want to go in and take a look?" The types of catgrass are very important. If you like animals, you can leave a comment here and I'll look into it. Begging for votes, recommendation votes, monthly votes. Originally, I didn't want to ask for monthly votes, but I suddenly realized that I'm already in 11th place in the monthly votes list. If I get one more place, I'll get a monthly vote award. Heartsuit, heartsuit, heartsuit. Chapter 50. He walked into the shop assistant's secret room. Dake opened his eyes and was dumbfounded. What kind of designer improved the catnip grass? The entire room was filled with dozens of pots of catnip grass. All kinds of catnip grass were drowsy under the influence of special spices. Among them, the most eye-catching one was a gigantic goldfish grass. The scene of a fat goldfish with white scales and red fins growing on the grass was like a nightmare. If the catnip grass was a creation of paradise, then the goldfish was a creation of the devil. Around the goldfish there were other kinds of catnip grass: skunk grass, hedgehog grass, earthworm grass, eel grass, pigeon grass, abalone grass, mouse grass, octopus grass, spider grass, scorpion grass, lizard grass, and a bunch of other new catnip grass. Seeing that Dake was so shocked that he couldn't speak, the shop assistant asked, "What do you think? Is there a breed that you like?" Dake raised his hand and pressed his chin back. After a while he said, "That goldfish is not bad." "Really?" The shop assistant was pleasantly surprised. "I think it's really good too. Those dull and lifeless fish eyes, the fish mouth that never closes, and the feeling that it's slightly fatter than normal goldfish. Wow, it's so cute." "Dake, heh." The shop assistant was still talking non-stop. "Actually, this batch of new breeds was improved by someone we hired. It's still in the testing stage. The main thing is to see how the response is." "If the response is good," Dake interrupted, "I'm looking forward to your finished product. Why don't we go look at the cat?" The shop assistant's tone became sluggish. "I also have a Yuba." After returning to the shop outside, Dake continued to pick catnip grass. In the end, he picked an American shorthair kitten from a bunch of catnip grass. Dake didn't have a preference for cat breeds. He liked all of them. Rather than saying that he had chosen this little kitten, it would be more accurate to say that the little kitten had bitten his finger in its mouth. The way the kitten used its two paws to grab his hand and sucked hard on his finger captured Dake's heart. Rage -1. The effect was immediate. The hidden danger of fury that had accumulated in his heart seemed to have been alleviated a little because of its appearance. If he were to describe his face in a comic book, his cheeks would definitely be round. The price of cat grass was not considered expensive. A pot only cost 50 credits, while a small bottle of cat juice cost 1 credit. Could be used for 2 to 3 weeks. Dake paid the credits without hesitation and planned to bring the catty plant and the catty plant back to the dorm. When he passed by Forest Cafe, he subconsciously glanced inside and suddenly saw AI Ma arguing with a senior. Both of them were holding the same book in their hands, and their expressions were serious to the point of anger. However, judging from the expressions of the other senior sisters around him, they didn't seem to care. Instead, they nodded their heads repeatedly. "Is this a tea party for women?" Dake smacked his lips, feeling that this place was truly a demon's den. So he left without looking back. It was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon when they returned to the dormitory. He placed the catty plant on the wide balcony and tied the string that extended from the pot to the railing according to the shop assistant's instructions to secure the pot. This way, the catty plant wouldn't run around. When it got used to the environment here, it probably wouldn't be possible to drive it out even if he wanted to. Then, Dake used some special spices that he bought from the shop assistant and sprinkled a few on top of the catty plant's head. It then entered a sleepy state. After doing all this, Dake moved the most important catty plant to the desk and compared it with a description in the book, carefully observing and recording it. After confirming his thoughts, he took out the magic brain dropper and the thinking bottle and prepared to transfer the 2 drops of pride stored in the thinking bottle to one of the branches of the catty plant. The whole process took 10 minutes. There was a small hole at the front of the branch that looked like a worm's mouth. It could be opened by injecting a little magic power, and it would close when the magic power dissipated. There was also a layer of liquid membrane inside that could lock the thought substance inside. After being injected with the thought substance, the branch would harden and show a strange, heavy state, drooping down like a ripe fruit. Once it drooped to a certain angle, it meant that there was no more space inside. Dake determined that the branch should be able to store one more drop of pride, so he used the dragonfly skimming the water technique to absorb the overflowing bit of pride and injected it. In this way there were 3 drops inside. Dake's pride index, including the 1 point that had quietly increased this week, had 104 points left. In general, he now had pretty good control over the various values of the 7 deadly sins and could be considered to have entered a good state of gradual growth. The next step of his plan was to try to make a magic card with 10 points of pride injected. He planned to make it next month, which was after Halloween. The 3 drops of pride in front of him, as well as the 2 drops that would be absorbed, would be stored until the beginning of the next month. During this time, he had to take good care of the caddy plant. He also had to master more and more comprehensive knowledge of making magic cards. In addition, the plan to collect flower cards also needed to be put on the agenda. He looked at his remaining credits and decided to make another trip to Traveler Street. Of course, first of all, he had to move the catty plant to the balcony to bask in the sun. Dake had only inquired about flower cards from Deanna and Luo C, so his knowledge was very limited. However, he roughly knew that this kind of thing was currently being circulated in 2 ways. One of the ways was through gifting. Someone would insert a flower card into a student's dormitory door and send it out. Dake had previously received a White Devil's Snare flower card. At first, he thought that this was a method similar to handing out flyers, but later he realized that not everyone could receive this gift. It was clear that the other party was targeting people. The other way through which flower cards were being circulated was through Traveler Street. It seemed that someone had sold a large number of flower cards to some shops on Traveler Street, and those shops would give the flower cards as gifts to students who came to shop. However, not everyone would give them away. Dake currently knew that the only shop that would give out flower cards was the Quirky Candy Shop. Therefore, he decided to go to the candy shop to take a look. Even if he couldn't find out anything, it would be good to get one more card. When he came to Traveler Street again, Dake's vision had widened a lot because he didn't have a strong sense of purpose. He also saw many details that he hadn't noticed before. The biggest treasure hunting ground on Traveler Street didn't seem to be those shops, but the stalls everywhere. The upperclassmen who set up stalls on both sides of the street really sold everything. He even saw a kind of semi-finished magic card that was almost cheating, with a completion rate of 90% and above. The Academy had stipulated that everyone could only use the magic card that they made themselves. However, there were policies from above and countermeasures from below. The Academy's rules were dead, but people were alive. As he walked, Dake suddenly noticed that there was an upperclassman selling a replacement card. Guess where did Dake make a mistake in this chapter? Looking for recommendation tickets, Heartsuit monthly tickets. Chapter 51. The replacement series of magic cards was extremely popular in Shangmalian Academy. Students always hoped to immediately take off their old school uniforms and change into their favorite clothes after entering Traveler Street. There was no changing room at the entrance of Traveler Street. If they didn't have a replacement card, they would need to borrow space from a clothing store. They would also need to bring a complete set of clothes, which was neither convenient nor beautiful. However, the clothing stores on Traveler Street would only provide the latest trendy clothes and would not provide replacement cards. Therefore, if students wanted to get a replacement card, they could only buy it from the stalls set up by senior students, apart from making it themselves. However, because the production of a replacement card was very complicated, it didn't earn many credits, so there weren't many people selling it. Dake stopped to look curiously and found that the replacement cards sold by this stall were all green, Halloween-themed models. When it came to Halloween, people would naturally associate it with pumpkins, candy, ghosts, and masquerade balls. On the eve of Shang Molian's Halloween, there would be an unprecedented masquerade ball that would turn the entire castle into a stage. If one could catch a hidden ghost at the masquerade ball, they could even exchange it for credits as a reward. The first website was https://vipcanshu. VIP those who caught the most ghosts would even get a special title. As Halloween gradually approached, some experienced senior students were already rubbing their hands together. Dake would occasionally hear them mention it in the common room. As for the first-year students, Halloween was a rare opportunity to earn a lot of credits. In short, when that day came, no one would wear a school uniform again. Of course, Dake didn't want to be the only exception. Since he happened to come across it, he wanted to choose a replacement card to use since it wasn't expensive anyway. He glanced at the three prices of 33 credits, 66 credits, and 88 credits. Dake didn't pay much attention to it. He squatted down and looked carefully for a while. Since it was a Halloween-themed model, most of the replacement cards here had extremely high body coverage. Of course, there were also the succubi models that were off the charts, but those were the minority. Most of them were the Vampire series, the Knight series, the Monster series, and the Palace series. Although there were quite a few others, there was no uniformity. First year, aristocratic house? The senior student who set up the stall asked casually. Dake nodded and said politely, "Hello, senior." The senior student laughed happily. "Although I'm from the House of Fools, I'm still your senior. My name is Leon. If your classmates also need to change their cards, they can find me in the common room of the House of Fools." Dake asked curiously, "Is there no access control in the common lounge of the House of Fools?" Leon explained, "Of course, but our miss is very hospitable. As long as you bring a gift, a small bottle of lubricant, she will open the door for you." Dake said in surprise, "Lulube." Leon averted his gaze and said awkwardly, "Anyway, that's what happened. Since you're a new student of the Aristocrat Academy, I recommend you this vampire set. This was the most popular set in the Aristocrat Academy in the past. I also injected sweet blood into the fangs. As long as you infuse magic, blood will flow out. That's really good." Dake lowered his gaze and looked through the vampire set. He found that it was the traditional red and black color scheme. It looked good, but he felt that something was missing. He asked casually, "Is there a Demon King set?" Leon's expression froze. "There is a hero set. By the way, I remember a student who called himself the hero's son came this year. Is he in your academy?" Dake said, "Knight Academy." "A knight," Leon said emotionally. "I really hope he can wear my Masquerade Knight set." Dake suddenly thought of something. "Masquerade Knight set?" "Yes," Leon said proudly. He was a very famous hero when the demons were still alive. He used a special belt. As long as you insert a card into the belt, you can transform into a Masquerade Knight. It's very similar to today's Holy Armor series magic cards. Do you know the Valkyrie Yalvet? She is one of the holders of the 12 golden holy armors. Of course, Dake knew the Valkyrie. He had also seen her complain that the holy armor was too tight. The so-called holy armor was very similar to the holy garment. The 12 golden holy armors were designed according to the 12 constellations. They could increase the user's strength and speed by hundreds of times. The Valkyrie who wore the holy armor was the real Valkyrie. Dake couldn't help but become interested in the Masquerade Knight set. But the more he looked, the more he felt that something was wrong. Why did the Masquerade Knight set here look like a Beelzebub set? Forget it, I'll just go with something more ordinary. This kind of full-body set really affected his mobility. If he was going to do something big on Halloween, it was better to choose a lighter set. For example, this night dress mask set was very good. Black dress, white glasses, crimson cloak, white gloves, and a blood-red rose. And it only cost 33 credits. I'll take this one. Dake didn't care too much. If it didn't work out, he could just change it. Lion wasn't unhappy that he chose the cheapest replacement card. Instead, he patiently explained how to engrave the final array on the replacement card. Dake expressed that he had learned a lot. These 33 credits were worth it. But before he left, Lion suddenly called out to him, "Oh right, I'll give you a love divination card. Enjoy your youth." Dake held the love divination card given by Lion. His thoughts a little chaotic. Lion seems quite honest, and he's also a student of the House of Fools. He doesn't seem like someone who would lie. Then, could it be that these love divination cards were really given out by Professor Kazair? Professor Kazair does have exquisite magical engineering skills, but does he have such taste? Dake carefully looked at the beautiful flower card in his hand. He couldn't imagine that Professor Kazair, who was of goblin descent, could make something like this. And according to Lion, Professor Kazair just gave them the flower cards and asked them to give them to the people they liked. There weren't many flower cards, and this was Lion's last flower card. Dake couldn't think of any common factors between himself and Deanna. He walked around the strange candy shop and bought some toffee. He really got another flower card. Then he went to the flower shop, the jewelry shop, the clothing shop. Some shops gave him a flower card while others gave him none. After walking around, he got a total of 8 flower cards, including the one given by Lion. Plus the one he already had. There were 9 flower cards in total. 9 flower cards, it's quite a harvest. Dake left Traveler Street before the sun set in the west. When he walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake, he happened to pass by White and Luo Boat. The 2 children seemed to have lost their previous estrangement and started to play together again. Speaking of which, have they finished their homework? Dake was confused. That's why I'm here. Chapter 52. He didn't know if White and Luo Boat had gone to the library or if they had finished their homework in the library. Dake was only slightly puzzled, but he didn't intend to delve into it. With 9 flower cards in hand, he had more control over Bliss. However, if these flower cards were really made by Professor Kazair, he wanted to understand and master the method of making them. On one hand, it was to have a stable source of flower cards. On the other hand, he was very curious as to why these flower cards could absorb Bliss. However, if he were to ask Professor Kazair, it would be too abrupt. Dake thought for a moment and quickly remembered that he still had a thinking bottle that he hadn't returned. Therefore, he quickened his pace and prepared to go back to the dormitory to take out the thinking bottle. The common lounge on Friday night was usually the most lively time. The students vented the learning pressure that had accumulated throughout the week and didn't have to worry about homework and class time. After all, it was only Friday and homework could be left for tomorrow. The class time was also something that needed to be considered the day after tomorrow. Remember the website, VIP Kanshu. VIP. Even the common lounge of the aristocrat compound was no exception. Dake walked through the crowd, avoided Deanna's gaze, and successfully entered the dormitory. The dormitory was very quiet, and there was no difference from before he left. He closed the door, turned on the light, and walked to the desk. The thinking bottle was in the drawer of the desk, so he took it and left. However, as soon as he started, he suddenly heard a meow in his ear. He couldn't help but turn and walk to the balcony. Is the cat grass awake? He opened the door and looked down at the cat grass on the balcony. Then there was silence. On the balcony, the cat grass was using 2 meatballs to grab the hanging insect branch, and its pink and tender little tongue licked the head of the insect branch back and forth. The insect branch that was supposed to be very hard after 3 drops of pride had been injected had returned to its soft appearance. Fury +1. He didn't expect to earn it back in the afternoon and return it in the evening. Meow. The cat grass didn't notice that its owner was angry and out of control. It put down the insect branch and trotted toward Dake. The tail of the cat grass was long enough for it to reach Dake's feet. Dake squatted down and put it on his lap. He was wondering if he should squeeze the juice or rub the meat tonight. Suddenly, he noticed that there was a faint mark on the catgrass's forehead. The coat of arms of arrogance. Dake frowned, and the anger in his heart quickly subsided. After checking it over and over again, he confirmed that it was indeed the emblem of pride. But what was surprising was that the catgrass didn't display the same pride as the little fiend and Ivan. Is it because it's a plant? Dake was deep in thought as he allowed the catgrass to suck on his finger. Speaking of which, how does the catgrass exist? Dake's eyes flickered as he took out Pride Eye from his card pack. Magical summoning. A dark golden ball of light flew out from Pride Eye and entered the top of the catgrass's head. But that magical card, which could make people arrogant, still didn't have any effect. Let's go to the library and check it out. Dake took a deep breath and put down the catgrass. Then he moved the worm tree into the room. Once bitten, twice shy. Tomorrow, he would go to Traveler Street to buy a fence to separate the worm tree and get some fur balls to relieve the catgrass's boredom. Dake sat down to take notes and found himself busy again. Should I go to the library first or find the professor first? Let's go to the professor. It's not too late to go to the library at night. Professor Kazair wasn't in the office. Dake went to the lab. As expected, he saw Professor Kazair making magic cards in the lab. But he wasn't making Jack Pumpkin today. Instead, he was making Mummy with bandages and mannequins. Dake thought about how to lead the conversation in a more natural manner. He opened the door and took out the White Devil's snare card. Dimming. Do you want to borrow the lab? The key to the lab next door is in the second drawer of the office. Professor Kazair looked very serious. Dake didn't put the thinking bottle on the lab table until he walked over. He said, "Professor, I'm here to return something." The thinking bottle. Professor Kazair looked back and smiled. You can use it for a while. Dake. No, Professor. I already bought a worm tree. He wanted to talk about emotions and thoughts first before moving on to the love divination card. But when Professor Kazair saw the flower card in his hand, he didn't even think about it. He said, "Why, you're also interested in this flower card?" Dake frowned and said, "Yes, Professor. I've been thinking, does the divination of this flower card involve peeking at the thought level?" Professor Kazair was slightly taken aback. Then he smiled even more happily. He put down the work in his hand, took off his experimental gloves and smiled. "I didn't expect your research on the thought level to have reached this point." Then he turned back to the lab table and stretched out his hand. Just as Dake was on high alert, he pulled out a flower card from the card bag on the shelf. The flower card was decorated with green roses. Pure and simple green roses, with the blessing of eternal youth, looking forward to the everlasting love. Professor Kazair's eyes flashed with gentleness. "Although this is just a small trick, there's something I can't see through. But as long as the magic power is interrupted, it can be separated. It's not harmful." When Dake walked out of the lab, he had already given up on probing Professor Kazair. Although he couldn't be sure, he felt that Professor Kazair couldn't be the one who really made the flower card. But Senior Leon didn't seem to be lying. In fact, he didn't have to. So, someone pretended to be a professor to win people's trust? Dake thought of the disguise card. If the disguise card was designed to look like a human, could one pretend to be anyone? This was both a hypothesis and an inference. Maybe I can study the disguise card. Panduola was playing with her cat grass on the counter. It was a fat chinchilla. It was a chinchilla, not a chinchilla. She used a silence card around the chinchilla to ensure that the chinchilla's cry wouldn't disturb the students in the library. Dake felt that her behavior was abrupt. She had never brought the chinchilla to the library before. Is it a bait? While thinking, Dake's fingers unconsciously scratched the chinchilla's chin. There was a scale on the chinchilla's chin. It was soft and warm and didn't hurt at all. Did you buy the chinchilla? Panduola squinted. Dake. I bought a short-haired cat. Collecting the title of Halloween, the one who catches the most ghosts. Heartsuit looking for recommendation votes. Looking for monthly votes. Heartsuit. Chapter 53. She sacrificed a little bit of her looks. Dake learned from Panduola about the location of books related to catnip grass and quickly found a book called Mimicry in the Plant World in the library. There were relatively few people in the library on a Friday night. Dake poured himself a cup of unscented black tea and carefully flipped through the book. Mimicry refers to the mimicry of a creature's form, behavior, and other characteristics of another creature, thereby benefiting one or both of them. It is a special behavior of creatures that evolved over a long period of time. The biological phenomenon of catnip grass originates from mimicry. A typical mimicry system consists of a mimicry, a simulated object, and a deceived person. Take catnip grass as an example. The mimicry is the catnip grass itself. The simulated object is a cat. And the deceived person is a human. The 6 major organs of a plant, root, stem, leaf, flower, fruit, and seed, divide the catnip grass according to its plant structure. The part buried in the soil is the root, the tail is the stem, and the hair all over its body is leaf. Dake was dumbfounded when he read this. According to his initial imagination, he originally thought that the cat part of the catnip grass should belong to the fruit. But now it seemed that this was not the case. The cat hair was the leaf. Its body, limbs, and head were the same as the main body of a cactus, the fleshy stem. As for the flower and fruit, every spring and autumn, beautiful flowers would grow on the top of the catnip grass. When the petals withered, it would bear fruit. As for the seed, it was naturally in the fruit. Dake continued to flip through the books and gradually gained a more detailed understanding of the ecology of the catnip grass. When it was about to bloom, most of the nutrients in its body would be transported to the top of its head, which would then produce flower buds, flower buds, flower buds, flower buds, and finally flowers, pollination, and fruit. This is a very important process. Dake drew the whole process into a graph in his notebook and then drew a circle on the top of the catnip grass. He was convinced that he had found the reason. In order to prove his theory, he flipped through a lot of information until 9 p.m. Then, he borrowed another book called The Costume Changer and left the library. Panduola wasn't always in the library. Most of the time Bella was on duty. After Dake returned to the dorm, he turned on the lights, put the borrowed book on the table, and then walked to the balcony. Meow! The catnip grass walked over with its short little legs. Dake squatted down and scratched its chin, while his other hand carefully touched the pride emblem on its head. Sure enough, there was a small bud in the middle of the emblem. Feeling the protrusion against his fingertips, Dark suddenly felt a little excited. What kind of fruit would the catnip grass bear fruit with pride? Speaking of fruits, there are countless magic potions made from various fruits. Even some magic elven cards require special fruits as the core material. Before it bears fruit, I might be able to research the related magic potions or the creation of magic elves. Because he was looking forward to the catnip grass, he felt the joy of catching a cat again. The fury that had accumulated in his heart had also dissipated a little. After a while, he took the catnip grass to the bathroom and washed it. Then he put it on the bedside table. After reading The Costume Changer for a while, he fell asleep. But Friday night didn't end. Deanna and Luo C were still messing around in the common room. After the tea party, AI Ma was invited to the reading club of the Sorcerer Academy. Tonight she stayed up all night. After Panduola calmed down, she was preparing for the magic duel tomorrow. White and Luo Boat, on the other hand, had fun for half the night before returning to the dorm. But not long after returning to the dorm, White quietly opened the door, took a look at Luo Boat's room, and slipped out of the Night Academy's tower. Walking into the silent castle, White couldn't help but recall what happened in the afternoon. Ai Ma's last ripple was too painful. It almost made him make the wrong decision. Fortunately, Luo Boat offered to study in the library, which gave him hope. Think about your parents who passed away. Although White had never met his parents, he grew up listening to stories about the hero. The hero had always been someone he looked forward to. When he learned from Principal Aerti that he was the hero's son, he was ecstatic. But now, looking back at what he had done in the past month, he wanted to find a hole in the ground and bury himself. When he first entered the library, he really did think so. He also set a small goal for himself, to surpass Dake Dimming before the end of the semester. But 2 hours later, the difficult arithmetic homework had worn away his willpower. After exchanging glances with Luo Boat, the two brothers reached an agreement: work and rest. They also learned from Dake's teachings. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the corridor. White took out Taboo Love and injected a little magic power. The pink mist drilled out of the card and gradually gathered into a vague human figure. He didn't forget his small goal to surpass Dake. And to achieve this, the conventional method was no longer feasible. He had to find another way. Following the pink mist's guidance, White once again came to the small temple that he had visited last night. The group of tinkers who were clamoring to start a holy war were not here. He carefully looked around, and after confirming that no one was hiding in a corner like he had last night, he came to stand in front of the statue. The skin of the statue became more delicate, and the white face emitted a soft halo, as if it could open its eyes at any time. White took out the chapters of the old days that he had borrowed from Luo Boat in the afternoon and carefully looked at the face of the statue. The chapters of the old days recorded the gods who ruled the worlds in the past. They existed at least 5 eras ago. They came from the starry sky. They walked in the abyss. They were once great. They once ruled the worlds. They had long been forgotten by history. They were the rulers of the old days buried in the dust of ancient times. Half an hour later, White's eyes were filled with joy. He found a god with a similar face to the statue. She was born in the moon and descended on the earth. She was both the goddess of the moon and the mother goddess of the earth. She specialized in the reproduction of all things and was not stingy with the grace of the earth. She was the most beautiful goddess, the master of the night. Her beauty was eternal. She was sacred and noble. She was in charge of fertility and love. The old dominators in this article were taken literally. The scope was very general and there were a lot of original parts. It did not only refer to the gods in the Cthulhu mythos. Everything was based on the setting of this book. Heartsuit recommendation votes Heartsuit monthly votes Heartsuit. Chapter 54. The scattered moonlight illuminated the dark night, and the Shangmalian was full of mottled shadows. At the top of the spiral clock tower in the center of the castle, Professor Didi Makeseaway floated in the air, gently flapping her wings like a butterfly. There were deep wrinkles on her forehead, and 2 incomplete moons were reflected in her eyes. Time was like a knife, it shouldn't be stained. With a trace of red light, the sky was torn open and warmth seeped in. Dake watered the insect tree with magic medicine, fed the cat grass with cat juice, and finished the breakfast brought by the little demon beast. He then left the tower and went to Traveler Street. The autumn morning was a little cold, and there were few people on Traveler Street. Dake bought a fence and some cat toys. After thinking about it, he bought a set of experiment tools according to the specifications of the laboratory. Ordinary experiment tools weren't expensive, but the parts that were expensive were the ones that were processed, such as the mercury glass rod used by Professor Thompson in class. Website: https://vipcanshu. Vipin edition. He bought 10 credit blank magic conduction cards, 250 credit blank magic conduction cards, and some commonly used basic materials. In short, there was a huge pile of bottles and cans. The credits were decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. And finally there were only about 200 credits left. It's not a good idea to always borrow the laboratory. I have to have my own set. Dake nodded with satisfaction and carried the big and small bags back to the dormitory. It was only 9 o'clock. Fortunately, the dormitory was spacious enough to plan a small corner for the experiment, and there was more than enough space. Then he took out the replacement card he bought yesterday from the card bag and put it on the table. According to Lion's explanation, all he needed to do was engrave the last miniature array in the bottom right corner of the card, and it would be activated. The replacement card was actually a type of item card, a variant of the armor series. Completely gave up on attack and defense, and only focused on the style and design. At most, it added a size change function. The Cayman Knight replacement card made by Lion was just a simple imitation. Intuitively speaking, it was a cosplay costume. Dake quickly completed the last step and tried it on. How to say it? It was convenient, but the workmanship was actually quite rough. In particular, this evening dress was no different from an ordinary evening dress. Since it was for Halloween, he might as well buy a high-end set himself. No, if my mother knows that I'm wearing such cheap clothes, she'll cry, right? Therefore, Dake tossed the replacement card into the drawer and decided to disassemble it when he wanted to study it. Then, Dake picked one of the 9 flower cards and prepared to do an experiment. The purpose of the experiment was very simple. It was to further verify the previous conjecture. The phenomenon caused by a flower card alone was not enough to prove that they could all absorb bliss. Therefore, at the very least, multiple experiments were needed to verify this. Moreover, he also wanted to see if he could control the frequency of magic input so that the flower card wouldn't mutate or be damaged after absorbing bliss. It was mainly White's forbidden love that inspired him. Since White could transform flower cards into magic cards, so could he. Bliss. 92. Yes, 2 points more than the end of last month. After the index for major sins exceeded 100 points, it would become slightly more difficult to increase, which gave him more margin. Dake didn't care about the extra 2 points. Instead, he carefully observed the flower card on the table. The exquisite flower plate was adorned with gorgeous red plum blossoms. They were proud and unyielding, gorgeous and enchanting. But what kind of evil was hidden under this gorgeous appearance? He was ready. Once again, he used the magic pen as a medium and tapped on the flower card, guiding magic bit by bit. The red plum blossoms bloomed from the flower card, releasing a fresh fragrance. With the continuous input of magic, they gradually dispersed, and an excessively fair and delicate face appeared on the card. The heart-shaped scale under the corner of the eye always made the face that belonged to the pure type become unusually coquettish. Dake held his breath and quickly changed his mind. The face of Panduola suddenly dispersed, and the cute catnip grass reappeared. Meow! The catnip grass squatting on the bedside table meowed at the right time. Quiet! The little fiend on the bird stand raised its claws at the catnip grass. A trace of arrogance appeared in its eyes as it looked down at the catnip grass that was bound by the flower pot, and constantly drew a sense of superiority from it. Dake was still concentrating on adjusting the output of magic. With the continuous input of magic, the red plum blossoms on the flower card suddenly changed. Dake instantly stopped the input and moved the magic pen away. The red plum blossoms trembled violently for a long time before stopping. Dake then tapped the magic pen again and tried to input a little more magic. Bliss -1. With just this little input of magic, the flower card broke through a certain threshold. The red plum blossoms that had just quieted down instantly went berserk. The bright red petals broke away from the calyx and turned into a whirlwind as they drilled out of the card. Dake immediately withdrew. The little fiend, who had been ready for a long time, only flapped its wings and shot out a thick syringe. While breaking the storm of petals, it nailed the red plum flower card to the table. Dake did not give up on the experiment because of this. He used a sealed bag to put away the remains of the red plum flower card and picked a new flower card. The garden full of spring can't be contained. A branch of red apricot blossoms out of the wall. The white apricot blossoms with a hint of pink were shy and cute, with a hint of temptation. He picked up the magic pen again and input magic. Although he had to be more careful this time, the amount of magic that the flower card could withstand was still at a critical point. Looking at the trembling apricot blossoms in the flower card, Dake thought for a long time and continued to input a little more magic. Bliss -1. The moment the system prompt floated in his vision, he immediately stopped the magic. However, there was still a change in this apricot flower card. The apricot blossoms on the card began to disintegrate into extremely thin threads from the edges of the petals. However, these pink threads did not turn into vines and snakes like the black roses threads and rush out to bite people. They were like woven clothes, wrapped round and round on the flower card neatly and neatly. When the last gap of the flower card was covered by the threads, they quickly melted and only dyed the flower card a faint pink. Dake looked at the flower card that had turned completely pink with a strange gaze and signaled the little fiend to grab it to take a look. The arrogance in the little fiend's eyes retreated. It immediately flew down from the bird rack and poked the flower card with its claws. With this poke, a trace of dense air climbed up its claws. One of its legs left the ground and spun around on the spot. As if it was drunk, its face was flushed red and it fell down with a plop. Please recommend me, Red Heart. You're tuning in to the Whispers of Romance YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.